there's some sort of like guardian class, like managing reality, spinning reality. They were building flying saucers. Like that is like true. The Die Glocke was under Kalmerstab exactly, which was this like, you'd create these sort of torsion fields. It would be like extremely high voltage. They create this like kind of artificial gravitational source, which slows down time. Every second, it's like actually 1/1000th of a second on the inside of the chamber. And you get forward-looking time travel where like a year goes by and 1,000 years go by for like the person on the inside. They walk out there in 1,000 years in the future. Yeah, and he's this weird figure where he does seem earnestly interested in consciousness, Puharich, and he's at Northwestern or something, and then definitely gets sucked into some sort of intelligence apparatus. But he had these space kids, and he would take it, he'd test them. It's kind of like Stranger Things or something.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the channeling sessions, they would say UFO is overhead now, and like they would, channel alien beings. He channeled this group that he called the Nine.
There was clearly this understood thread running throughout cultures that you could somehow with your consciousness do these cosmic ascent rituals and literally go to the cosmos. Whether it's Taoist or Platonists or Hermeticists, you would literally somehow ascend these strata of different layers of reality.
Well, I could steel man going through space as like a hermetic ritual, right, where like you are expanding your consciousness. I mean, like there's so many people who are like so much smarter than me on like pyramid stuff. But my suspicion, we're gonna figure out this model where it's astronomically aligned. You are generating energy, but the energy it's not like some nuclear fusion, ancient advanced civilization. It is actually a portal.
Yeah, maybe it's like an etheric bridge or something.
Yeah. It's like a Stargate. Let's do it, man.
It's 4
yeah.
on the dot. 4 is the number of Hermes. So,
there you
so
go.
Let's go.
Perfect.
Yeah. Now to reintroduce this conversation like we haven't already been having it for the last 45 minutes, but I was going to say I've been noticing a trend in your content, but maybe it's not a trend, but I know you personally are really interested in the relationship between the phenomenon, the space program, spacefaring in general, and the esoteric. And you have a fantastic video you did on that topic. Actually, what is the name of that video?
I think it's something around NASA and its occult rituals.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right. And that is such a great jumping off point for this conversation because you present just an incredible smorgasbord of fascinations in that video, man, from people who are core to the space race and the technologies around it, feeling like they're channeling higher intelligence or other entities, to this sort of like cosmism, this idea that we're destined to go into the stars and humanity really has this teleological bend to leave the Earth and populate the cosmos, to the Nazi stuff with paperclip and their interest in the esoteric and UFOs, and NASA more directly, right? With this could be a good jumping off point for this conversation. That quote from Pasulka, where she's talking about, naming rockets after Greek gods and satellites after deities. And she mentioned something about a Latin phrase written on the side of a rocket, I think. And she asked the question, and I don't remember who she's asking this to. Was it Tim Taylor?
Maybe.
Okay. She says, who's reading Latin in space? And his answer is something like, our sponsors.
Yes.
They're using the images of Roman gods. And I would ask him, I said, why are you using the images of Roman gods? Why are you putting them on your mission patches and also utilizing Latin phrases from that time period? I mean, you're sending it up into space. Who up in space is going to read Latin? And his answer was, our sponsors.
What do you make of that, first of all?
It's so strange. And yeah, if you look at the start of every single space program, so like the 3 big ones would be the US, former Soviet Union, Russia, and Germany, Nazi Germany. In all 3 cases, you had the original people who started the programs, from Jack Parsons in the US,
yes,
saying he was in touch with otherworldly entities and, was part of the OTO and was doing these like sex magic rituals, but also was doing tests in the Mojave Desert with his rockets and claimed to see what seemed like a Nordic woman from Venus, like in almost like a pre, Betty and Barney Hill, like literal extraterrestrial visitation. You have him, down the middle, like just weird, guy who's claiming to be in touch with other entities. But then you have Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and Russia, who is, I think Nicholas Fyodorov really helped create kind of the intellectual bedrock for cosmism before him, but was a total cosmist, as you mentioned, of the variety of people who believed that, we would, it was our mission teleologically to populate, all the stars, and that, and all the, various, solar systems, but the Milky Way specifically, like near term, and they believed in time travel, and they totally believed in these sort of angelic sponsor beings, and it was a form of Christianity, actually, cosmism was.
Interesting.
And so, like, that's a great example. And then the third example would be Hermann Oberth, kind of the intellectual godfather of German rocketry, and you see their videos of Hermann Oberth talking about UFOs. And talking about them in actually like a more nuanced way than you hear certain talking heads talk about UFOs now, where he talks about them hopping through time and space and not just hopping through space in the way that we normally, kind of a Jacques Vallée style. Like these things aren't just traversing through space, like, in traditional rocketry. So here's a guy who is, creating kind of the bedrock of rocketry in Nazi Germany. And then he's talking about UFOs in this very nuanced way. And he says, we got help in our rocketry program. He literally says, we were helped. And then his understudy is a guy named Werner von Braun, who we all know.
Who's that? No,
exactly. Yeah, literally went on to run the NASA Saturn program. Literally created the American, program in NASA, and was brought over here as part of Operation Paperclip. And Werner von Braun, also just a strange guy who he shows up all over UFO lore. He was friends with Edgar Mitchell, who was from Roswell, and told Edgar Mitchell, I think something happened at Roswell.
How did I not know he was from Roswell?
Edgar Mitchell was. Yeah. It's pretty wild. Yeah. And he told he encouraged Edgar Mitchell to do ESP experiments in space, extrasensory perception. And you can't take everything, at face value from that time. But who's the remote viewer who I'm blanking on? You can
Nico Swan?
No.
Pat Price?
No. Just like the kind of the Israeli Uri Geller.
Oh, Uri Geller.
Yeah, Uri Geller. You can't take everything he says at face value, but he has a story of Werner von Braun taking it and showing him like a piece of metal or whatever, and he says it's not from here, and Werner von Braun says you're right, and then Werner von Braun, you have Launchpad 33, Freemasonic symbolism, and you have Werner von Braun's friendship with Walt Disney and the movie they made about space travel, where there's like an alien base on the moon, and like, so there are all these weird undercurrents when you go back to the origins of the space program, where there's honestly a whole lot of smoke, not a ton of fire, which is an issue. And I'm just calling attention to the smoke, and I'm sure there's like one thing I got slightly wrong in that whole compendium of things, but like just take that, that at face value, and there's something up with the story of rocketry.
We are drowning in smoke. This entire conversation, the entire whole UFO milieu, but really the human condition, right? It's so much smoke emanating from some unknown source or sources that we're left to try to make sense of. And in a lot of ways, I was just saying this to you before we started recording, where you often end up is you have this incredible array of glistening, novel puzzle pieces that in and of themselves are puzzle pieces that it's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle consisting of Rubik's cubes that you could configure in 5 different ways and fit together in ever shifting mercurial forms or something like that. And yet, I do want to try with this conversation to see if we can assemble some of those puzzle pieces into something that might be a coherent hypothesis as to what's going on, at least in a broad sense. Like, I'm not saying smoking gun. It's like, it was this guy at this time who hit the button and let the, like open the portal to the upside down. And not exactly like that. But can we get a gestalt view of what we really think, if we had to push our chips forward, what we think is going on with what we call the phenomenon, with what we call, maybe that's already ambitious enough to say, we call the phenomenon. But do you take that, to go back to that initial question about Pasulka and talking to this mysterious Tim Taylor figure, we think, this point about our sponsors, do you think there's any reasonable hypothesis as to what she meant by that? Is the context exactly in which she was saying that known?
She definitely seems to be implying that, you know, he meant extraterrestrials or some sort of like guardian class on Plato that's sort of above us, where if we ascend, you know, into space, like we need the permission of these, you know, beings that are definitely non-human intelligence, like presumably like, you know, above humans on the consciousness food chain, so to speak. But beyond that, I don't think she gives a ton of context. I had a conversation with Tim Taylor and he said something very similar to me. And so I literally, you know, before doing my podcast I would invest in all sorts of, you know, startup tech, that sort of thing, and occasionally invest in space. And one of the companies I was invested in was a rocket company, and they were kind of flailing, like they were having trouble getting off the launch pad. It's a really complex business, and you have like a ton of subcomponents and these sort of chain reaction failures that are just, it's a, you know, pain in the ass. And, you know, even SpaceX, there's totally like a counter history where like it just didn't work. And there's a graveyard of these sorts of companies. So they were struggling. And I, you know, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I just read this crazy UFO book and there's this guy in it, you know, and so I managed to get in touch with Tim Taylor, and I basically was like, hey, we're like, can't get off the launch pad, you know, like what do you know, is there something to this consciousness connection? Like, can you know, affect these things at all via consciousness? Which I felt like crazy.
I'm just laughing because I feel like this is a great example of your like personal interest creeping into what is supposed to be like your day job. I was the same. Like, we had very different day jobs, but it was the same for me, man. I was spending way too much time doing everything but that, and then that was invading everything having to do with my mundane life. But anyway,
well, aren't we lucky now that we just get to like, you know, cover all the crazy shit? I pre-pandemic, I think felt really, and I'm sure this might resonate with you. I felt like super compartmentalized. Like there was always this like wacky stuff that I was into, and I felt like it was this single line update of code that like would change everything if it was real, but it always felt kind of like separate from like what was actually important in my like in my, you know, local life that like needed to get done, and it was useless as far as like being able to like do anything with it. And then I do think the pandemic forked reality and took us on a weird timeline.
Well, I don't want to distract from the story you're telling, but you're also reminding me of another core component of this conversation, specifically the relationship between the esoteric and the phenomenon. And another one seems to be that outward events are symbolic of something deeper, or maybe even engineered to bring something from deeper within reality into fruition, like some sort of weird, like esoteric version of the Copenhagen interpretation or something, where you're like ritualistically collapsing some sort of wave function possibility to bring something or ignite something into existence or something. I don't know, but continue that story before we get too far away.
Well, long story short, you know, I'm on this like Zoom call with, you know, Tim Taylor, and I'm like, you know, is there anything to this consciousness connection? You know, I'm grasping at straws because, like, you know, the team was like kind of doing all the right other things, you know, basic first order, you know, materialist things. And he was like, well, you have to get in touch with you have to be aligned with what they want. And he like points up, and I don't remember the exact, again, like kind of to the Pasulka thing, like I don't remember the exact step sequence of how he said it, the words he said, what, you know, what I followed up with after, but I do remember it was clear to me that he was talking about aliens, or not necessarily aliens, but like other beings, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was like, whoa, that's kind of trippy. And I wish now, in retrospect, I had asked him a million other questions,
Yeah.
because a million other things have sprung up from either, he's this NASA mission controller, to your first question that just seems to pop up in all these UFO experiencers' lives. Also claims to be part of a secret space program where he receives downloads that help with scientific innovation. You have all these weird things like that. I mean, I just interviewed a physicist named Kevin Knuth, who
that name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's at University of Albany's, former NASA, super hard-headed guy. Like, could have a conversation with, a normal credentialed physicist and like keep up, one-to-one on everything kind of, conventional, but also is very interested in this stuff. And he pointed out that I think his name might be Stephen Hubbard, but you should fact check this.
Relation?
What's that?
Any relation to
L. Ron? No, but I think spelled the same way. And I believe he was a director of NASA Ames, and he wrote a psychic spying manual for the CIA. His name is on it. And so you have stuff that comes up all the time with NASA, or like the anti-gravity stuff I'm into with Townsend Brown, where they literally have a patent on a barrel-shaped asymmetric capacitor from 2003. Yeah. And it was either it might have been 2000 it was maybe 2004 actually. 2003, a year before that, there's a Guardian article that comes out where they say we're no longer looking into Townsend Brown's work after decades of looking into it. So it's this weird, like, why would you come out with a patent like a year from saying that you're like sunsetting the research around this guy? There's so much weird stuff around NASA.
Yeah, they're no longer looking because they found it. That was the implication.
Right.
Yeah, one of the other things that's interesting too about this guy, about this figure, Tim Taylor, and it's funny, I still get a weird feeling like, are we not supposed to talk about this guy? And maybe you know more about that than me, but...
We return to Diana Pasulka in her discussions with the enigmatic Tyler D. Timothy Taylor, the NASA mission controller. One of the most curious aspects of Taylor's story is his claim that he receives downloads from an intelligence he believes is non-human. These downloads appear as sudden flashes of insight, full mental blueprints, or instructions. He says they come to him through specific protocols, and they've led to real patents in technologies. They have also shaped how he approaches his ongoing work within the US space program. Even if we take the most skeptical approach, assuming Taylor is simply a high-ranking engineer with strange personal beliefs, it still leaves us with a wild but undeniable fact. Someone overseeing major NASA launches believes they are influenced by a non-human intelligence. Finally, I've found this bizarre connection between Tim Taylor and mid-century anti-gravity inventor Thomas Townsend Brown. Brown's daughter Linda reviewed Tim Taylor's book on Amazon before anybody knew who Tim Taylor was, well before he was written about even pseudonymously in Diana Pasulka's American Cosmic. And then Tim Taylor apparently told Christopher Bledsoe's son, Ryan, that he was part of a secret time travel program in Nassau in the Bahamas, and that Thomas Townsend Brown was the president of that group. I know a ton about Thomas Townsend Brown, and I can tell you definitively he was obsessed with time travel. He also spent an inordinate amount of time in the Bahamas with the inspiration for James Bond and Winston Churchill's super spy, William Stevenson. And then there's Tim Taylor telling Pasulka that he was part of the quote-unquote adjustment team, an homage to Philip K. Dick's great book about a team of time travelers.
Another thing, though, is that he specifically talks about the need to do protocols, right?
Yeah.
To align your consciousness, essentially, with whatever they are, or that higher source of wisdom is. And I think a lot of people, sidebar into this, when a lot of people hear esoteric or occult, their mind, I think, is programmed to think nefarious. And this must be something dark or something, pulling on some sort of dark threads from behind the veil. And I don't think of it that way, but that may just be me, being read in the directions that I'm read into. But maybe the unspoken things that don't get said a lot about this guy and about people who talk about this. You seem to have actually interfaced with a lot of them, or at least some of them. Do they strike? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you say it.
Yeah.
How do they just strike you as people? Do they strike you as someone who's very plugged in, calm, knowledgeable. What
Are you
is
talking about UFO experiencers or like aerospace?
someone like Tim?
Someone like
Yeah.
Tim Taylor. Very limited. It was 20 minutes
Okay.
or something like that. But he struck me as actually pretty calm and reasonable. And then my meta knowledge now is that this guy is sort of showing up in all these UFO experiencers' lives, is like, seems like deeply, connected at like high levels.
Yeah.
And like, he's definitely like operating on many layers. Like,
Yes.
I think that sort of, calm veneer was not indicative of some sort of, simplicity of sort of thought. You could also say somebody like that, if they're truly receiving downloads, are just like they're just operating according to some mandate based on like what they're getting, and they are simple in some ways. But I would guess that his worldview, if you were to get into like his metaphysics, which he did with Diana Pasulka, he literally, it goes into like a hierarchy of being, and it's crazy. You could like try to pull it up, but it's
Man, I need to. I haven't read. That's American Cosmic, right?
That's American Cosmic.
I read her other or more recent book,
Encounters. So no, the American Cosmic is like maybe my favorite UFO book, like maybe ever. It's amazing. I mean, it's really trippy and weird and interesting. It's not the book that I'd say is the bedrock of like a solid intellectual foundation on this topic. I think it's great, but like I think like a Robert Hastings UFOs and Nukes or some of these other books might be a little better there. But it's a great kind of like it's a great like audience surrogate book. Like you look at the UFO phenomena through the eyes of an academic skeptic who looks at this stuff as, it's kind of ridiculous, and then kind of falls into it, this sense of, oh, there's something very real here, herself. And it's just so powerful. But yeah, so she obviously as part of that book meets Tim Taylor, NASA mission controller, and he gives her this hierarchy of being, and it's something like humans, like intelligence officers, alien human hybrids.
Oh wow! So he just
angels or something.
Yeah.
It's just like a full thing. Yeah. It's and you pull it up, and I'm sure I got something slightly off there, but it's so he does have this bizarre metaphysical worldview, and then he's telling Chris Bledsoe, that he is reporting to an angel, like the hammer is like this angel that he's taking orders from. And I do not believe you can take any of this stuff at face value. You have to scrutinize it as, it's coming from this intel officer, NASA guy who's showing up in these lives of these UFO experiencers.
Friends, I have been doubling down on content over in the YouTube members section and on Patreon. So if you desire further novelty, point your qualia in said directions. If you do join up at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops, you will also get access to a patron-only Discord and other rewards. Or if you just want that content, flip over to the member section here on YouTube and become an initiate. In fact, I just uploaded a mind meld earlier today with one of my favorite incarnations, my man Eric Godsey, and I did the same last week with another of my favorite beings, Molly Adler. So much love for supporting, and back to the mind meld.
I do not believe you can take any of this stuff at face value. You have to scrutinize it as, it's coming from this intel officer, NASA guy who's showing up in these lives of these UFO experiencers. But I also think I think there's a whole cadre of people online who are so quick to just be like, he was clearly trying to spin their experiences. And there's so many other things. He could have a million other ulterior motives outside of trying to spin their experiences, involving collecting just information on their experiences and actually viewing those experiences as valid. And so I think there are so many people who are like, oh, these experiences are so, they're vulnerable and they're so credulous. And in certain cases, I do think they are credulous. But I think you'd want like, oh, he came in with this agenda and he told them that it was like this thing or whatever. He used this machine on them, or I don't know. But who knows? It's interesting, and I do think stories involving him, you can't necessarily take all of the experiencer stories at face value, but you the inquiry into them, you have to view as like this serious, important thing. Like, obviously, you know, that seems like clear to me.
Totally, man. Yeah. Whether you're looking at it from a complete counterintelligence point of view, or you're looking at it like some, you know, manicured version of the truth, it's something that it's information, right? And you have to decide if it's negative information or positive information in terms of sense making, and that in and of itself is a very instructive thing. But when we're talking about this hypothetical guardian class, I was trying to do more research along the lines of there being some sort of intermediary group that is not extraterrestrial or human, or I would say is human, but is human in a sort of like just to throw all the buzzwords out there, in some sort of like antediluvian, ancient, hyper advanced human kind of way, where they are human, but they're so different than we are, and their understanding of reality is probably so much deeper than ours is, that to even compare them to a modern human is almost like a non-starter. But my mind's been going there more and more, and talking to people like Randall Carlson make me think that there's more of a there potentially, because there is so much. And again, this might be my desire to like merge multiple things that I'm interested in, but there does seem to be a there in terms of there being surviving members of some kind of an ancient civilization that passed information down to modern people who are still extant now, right? And the question is if those people are still around, or those strains of wisdom are still around. And there are so many different versions of this, again, merging it with the esoteric and its relationship to the phenomenon. I mean, it's just replete, man. If you read any of these classic works, like, you know, Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, or, you know, anything written by even Neoplatonists, there's this understanding that there are these strains of ancient wisdom that persisted through Egypt, through the Babylonian, through mystery temples, whatever, that we're still tapped into, and a very, very elite kind of priestly hieratic class still know this whole other strain of information. And when you read about this stuff, like, have we talked about like the telestic arts and stuff like that?
No.
So yeah, there's this whole other strain of technology that is essentially, you know, we would think of it as like alchemical knowledge or something like that. But you see it specifically written about by people like Iamblichus or Zosimus, who's this alchemist in the Greco-Egyptian kind of milieu, and he's doing things like, you know, he'll be talking about visionary experiences of like gods, and it sounds like something out of Jung's Red Book. He'll be talking about something like that, where I know there's some passage, I can't remember it exactly or even close to exactly, but you know, there's like a throne and a being and like blood spilling out and blah, blah, blah. And then he'll come straight back into waking consciousness and somehow channel that into some kind of direct wisdom about a problem that he's working on. And then he'll put that into like something having to do with making a sacred statue or something. And to put a little finer point on this, what they were trying to do was create sacred technologies, basically, that literally would channel higher consciousness into a statue, into a magical implement, into a temple. And it had everything to do with sacred geometry and visions and inspiration that you would get from these visions. And that's in another milieu, an example of the exact same thing we're talking about, right? Like these people who are involved in making these breakthrough technologies, doing something that like pierces the veil or expands the horizon of what's possible through technology and this weird relationship we have to outside consciousness. But now the whole reason I'm bringing this up, I'm sorry to forget why I even brought that up specifically, but broadly, this idea that there could be this existing strain still that remembers remembers how to do that. And I think that could also be the guardian class, right? Is like one the obvious thing is extraterrestrials or some kind of advanced intelligence that's non-physical, that's ultra-terrestrial in the sort of John Keel sort of sense, or maybe ascended master kind of, you know, Helena Blavatsky
Mhm.
type early 20th century sense. But another way to think about this guardian class could be a group of hidden, super advanced human beings. And I'm wondering, in all of the research you've done and all of the thinkers you've come across in this space, is there somebody who thinks about the breakaway civilization in that kind of a way, as like an advanced, ancient, esoteric group of people? Because I want to know who that
Eh,
person is, if there is.
Maybe Jacques Vallée.
Okay.
And the only reason I say maybe is because he doesn't overtly say that. But if you read like Invisible College, he'll say alien abductions pattern match oddly to, in this very one-to-one way to ancient mystery rituals.
Yes.
Where there's this sort of priestly elder and he's like testing you. Maybe you have to drink a drink or something. And you're like, what? Like, you're reading that. And then you find out that he's a Rosicrucian.
Yes.
Or whatever. And so then is like the ET thing, a la the like UFOs past, present, and future, which he partook, in 1974.
Yeah.
After the Blue Book cover up, is that then this like noble mythology or whatever around like, aliens from another planet or whatever? I don't know. But he would be the closest. I mean, Pasulka also talks about Heidegger's the question concerning technology, and Heidegger is also this kind of somewhat esoteric, and maybe he's esoteric. I don't know. You'll never know or something.
Yeah.
But like he's interested in weird esoteric stuff, and like that essay to me is like unreadable. Like I've tried to read it, and it's like these are the 5 stages of technological manifestation, and it's like impossible to read. But it is weird stuff around sacrifice and rituals and stuff, and then you get the tech, and it was strange, right? And so is the alien thing and like the secret space program that Tim Taylor is a part of just like the modern manifestation of that? Like possibly.
Right.
I don't know if there's like one thinker that ties it all together, but Pasulka also hints at it with Encounters, that follow-up book that you read, where she has a friend whose father was in the quote-unquote secret space program, and he would talk at the lunch table with his friends, and they would make jokes, and they would specifically use this one word, simulacra, all the time.
Yeah.
So like that's, as like that's a Platonic, or it's really like, I guess that's it's kind of like a Baudrillard, like postmodern, maybe that's where it was sort of popularized, but it's a Platonic idea, at its core. And so that would also, comport with maybe there is some mythological shading going on at these kind of like elite class levels. Not even class, like it's probably really simplistic to say it's like cut by socioeconomic, it's just the Gilded Age families or something. Like that's kind of ridiculous, right? But like there's some sort of like guardian class, like managing reality, spinning reality. Ingo Swann talks about he says, are there there's spin doctors on like in any news that you read or whatever, which is probably true. And he's like, are there reality spin doctors, And then you get into the parapsychology stuff, and I think there are plenty of proponents of like, oh, there's like a mental connection with reality. The materialist reductionist divide is like not correct. But then if you actually take that to its logical conclusion, very few people extrapolate out like how a society would function in the world where A, that's not only true, but B, it's true in a way that's exploitable. That's not like sort of like the consciousness thing is not just like this weak interaction that like everybody has like in the same way. Like what if there are people who are like better at that thing, at the skill of like literally take like a random event generator and like a random quantum mechanical process, like somebody has like a more of an effect on that. Then you get into like we were talking about like mesmerism or whatever, and you get into like weird like control systems and secret societies, and like that all sounds insane, right? And you're talking about it just now with like the, these like hermetic, groups that have like maybe had disproportionate influence across, many era that like Manly P. Hall and others like that about.
The Great White Brotherhood. And like, there's this idea, how there's that idea of the Maitreya Buddha, where it's like, it's essentially like the next Buddha will come essentially when all wisdom of the previous Buddha goes away.
Whoa.
And there's a very similar, Hermetic prophecy that it's like that wisdom or Hermes or this brotherhood will emerge again at some point, right? Where they're badly needed, or something, right? Or maybe there's just some other kind of catalytic event that needs to occur. And is that real? I have no idea. It's probably wishful thinking, but it's an idea that perks up my wonder whiskers for sure. But we glanced like right past him. But one of the things I did want to riff on specifically more was Parsons.
Yeah.
Because Parsons is such a rare manifestation of exactly what we're talking about. Not just like, hey, this person's into some really philosophical ideas that have a lot to do with what we're talking about, but this is someone who is actually doing active occult work to try to bring about some sort of change within the fabric of reality.
Yeah.
And in his mind, at least, he's equating the rocket era with that as well. So there was no divide in this man's mind, who's one of the fathers of rocketry, if not the father of rocketry, who's doing, like you said, he's part of the OTO. He's doing rituals to bring about or do the Babylon working or whatever, and bring about the moon child. That is like from my understanding, it's a distillation of the goddess or some specific goddess. And in doing that, that would somehow be this catalytic moment of this new era being born. And not only is he doing this stuff, doing, sex magic rituals and blowing up, proto rockets, he's doing things that are freaking out Aleister Crowley. Like Crowley is writing him letters, essentially, from my understanding, being like, what the hell are you doing? Like what you're doing is dangerous, and you don't understand what you're doing, essentially, is at least my memory of it. So yeah, man, he's just such a crazy microcosm of this idea of somebody understanding that there are unseen forces at work here, and what we do here is some kind of strange manifestation of something else somewhere else in some unseen layer of reality.
Yeah, he's a great example because he's like an industrialist who you can't really argue with his contributions. You could say people at JPL like later, systematized what he built or whatever. But I mean, I think it's like a running joke there. They called it Jack Parsons Lab, JPL. And, he definitely was doing the early experimentation that you can't really argue with. And you can always say with these people that, the craziness, the crazy worldview is this sort of like incidental byproduct of, somebody who is willing to, push past the normal boundaries of science or technology. And so the two often go hand in hand or whatever. But no, I think he's a great example. I'd say the opposite is often the exception to the rule. Like for somebody to like radically rewrite the rules of reality in the form of like new science and technology, if that's not accompanied with some trippy kind of metaphysical baggage, like I think that's often, the exception to the rule, or to put it differently, not necessarily metaphysical baggage, but if you actually look at the phenomena of like how the revelation occurred, I even use the word revelation. It's more like the insight occurred via this like revelatory process. It's more like revelation than it is like, oh, I just like finished the like last line of the equation on the whiteboard. Like this like inductive logic, like, oh, figured it out with my rational mind. Like that's super rare.
Right. Yeah, maybe it is because that gets me into big surprise into the Platonic idea of wisdom, right? Because you have to go, the highest kind of wisdom is above your dianoia. It's above your rational faculty. Like you a lot of times it's just talked about like a direct apprehension or an intuitive apprehension. But I think there's a hidden implication there. And Plato even talks about this in, theomania, divine madness, being a higher kind of knowing. Maybe you have to break your mind in order for the outside higher wisdom to get in. Like you've got to do something to destroy the ego temporarily or poke a hole in the ego temporarily. Like clearly that seems to happen with psychedelics, right? Like feeling massively inspired or feeling like you're reaching epiphanies after an impactful trip. That happens. It seems like it was happening to people like Parsons and doing whatever like Bacchic sex magic rituals. So maybe there's something to that about even if you're even if you're not necessarily seeking to gain particular wisdom by entering in those spaces, maybe you're just forming enough cracks for something to seep in.
Yeah.
And when it reforms, it's kind of like you have that epiphany because you were able to go out of your mind and bring something back. I don't know.
I think that's right. Yeah, that's my kind of really fuzzy working model of how this stuff works. Is like, you could think of the body as like a compression on, a default state of greater omniscience and knowing. And you can have cracks in that prism that, it's like Rumi, through the light comes the wound or something. Where, like normally you'd say like the senses just produce, the reality you understand. But in the Platonic model, what we're saying is like the default state is actually not just like blackness. It's like, it's not just like darkness. It's like, it's knowing much more. It's like this like omniscient state of like, seeing much greater reality. And you could poke that with you could increase that with psychedelics, which I like the words or the term like non-specific amplifiers,
right.
because the intentionality behind the like cracks are really important as well. So people have near-death experiences all the time, and they have like it's like a crack in the biological collapsing function. And if you do crack the biological collapsing function, you're actually more content is going to come in. And same with if you look at psychedelics like the psilocybin with the default mode network, that inhibits connections made by other regions of the brain. And so if you like shut that down, you have like you're amplified more or whatever.
Right.
And so near-death experiences, psychedelics, anything kind of traumatic, I think allows like this like kind of weird esoteric like otherworldly knowledge to like seep in. And then I think that can be bad if it's like kind of the reason people have like negative connotation around the occult stuff is the occult just means hidden, right? Is because like often there's this like left-hand path of like, I want the knowledge to like gain power over other people or whatever. And then there's like probably some more like faith-based, humble, healthy thing where it's like you had just like a really cool, Pasulka would call like a hierophany or like a, this revelatory experience where that wisdom seeps in. But I do think we're going to come upon a model that works more like that and doesn't work like this, like bottoms up, like your senses are just produced by like neurons and electrons, and then you see reality. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the cool ideas also within the Platonic milieu that makes all of this make so much more sense is obviously one of the core ideas around understanding is anamnesis, which is, Socrates talking about how knowledge is remembered rather than empirically gained through interfacing with the outside world. And one of the reasons that's possible is because in the Platonic view, your soul is actually like a minor god. So, I'm not going to go down like the whole crazy Timaeus rabbit hole, but basically in the whole creation, I will say myth, but it's a myth in the way that they were actually trying to grok the truth of how the cosmos was constructed and how the divine mind or the demiurge constructed the cosmos. And I always feel like I need to say not the evil demiurge, but the actual demiurge, which is just the divine creative mind.
Yeah.
When he created souls, he used the exact same substance that he used to create the gods, basically. So we're just essentially a less pure alloy of the same thing, basically. So if you can connect to your own soul and you can sort of remove the stains that get into your what they would call the pneumatic or pneumatic vehicle, and you get a clearer view of your soul's own light, you are just bathed in knowing and wisdom, supposedly. And I think in those kinds of knowing, or maybe you're doing a ritual or you're doing a psychedelic or you've been in a meditation retreat, like a Vipassana retreat for multiple days. And I've heard this actually from people who have done Vipassana retreats is you are just so inspired, man. And you're not supposed to write and you're not supposed to talk. So you just have all of this revelation and inspiration
Yeah.
flowing through you. I was just talking to, I think it was Danny Goler, who was telling me he was on a Vipassana retreat with a musician. And then right after the retreat, the dude wrote an entire album in like a weekend because it was just flowing into him the whole time. And as soon as he left, he was just like, I'm writing a whole album. So maybe it's something like that. It's the only thing that's preventing us from connecting with this higher wisdom is just our own earthly filth, our own, like you were saying, because the default mode network is the same thing, right? Because it's self-referential thinking.
Yeah.
It's thinking about, why did I do this? Oh, I got to do this later. Oh, after that, I really need to do this. You got to get out of that. I mean, that is like the anti of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, all the mystery rituals, the goal is to liberate the soul from the body in some ways. And like, I think whether it's you're putting your hand in a glove full of bullet ants to like, you experience this excruciating pain where you're like completely out of your mind,
thanks.
literally. Yeah, no thanks. Or you take the Kekion and the Eleusinian mystery rituals, you're temporarily killing the compression. And so if you kill the compression, you get the whole thing. You get like more. And so I think that makes sense to me. And then it's like, what's the intention behind doing the thing? And that seems like really important for like what you get on the other side and how you integrate it. But I love the Platonic model of, anamnesis. You forget your soul self, and then you experience noesis when you do have that collapse of the compression algorithm or whatever, and you do see everything.
Right.
And you even see this empirically. We talked about near-death experiences, and psychic phenomena and stuff. But like with the telepathy tapes, often these kids are nonverbal or autistic, or they're not embodied. So it's like if you weren't embodied, you just see that as like an issue, right? But like if you see that as like like we go back to this model of like you have like the soul state and then the incarnate state or whatever, then you're not like in the VR video game as much. You're like in the like less bit compressed, more real thing. So you're more psychic, like, and so you get into all these things like that where it all kind of makes sense. Yeah. And then like we're still obviously in the Stone Age. As far as like the problem with like science is like you don't, unless it's like you could put math to it and it's perfectly repeatable, you can't call it science. So then it ends up in this awkward bucket like called parapsychology, which is like the worst branding of all time because para is like paranormal and psychology is like not replicable and like seen as like this modern, endless digression or what, it's sort of like impossible to get to the bottom of anybody's psychology or whatever. And so it's like this mashup of these like two already very amorphous sciences. One literally has like is a stigmatized thing. Yeah. And then it's just this bucket of like all these anomalies, but you can find real patterns with the anomalies that like make a way better model. And then because you can't turn it into like math, like electromagnetism or general relativity, it's just, it's, you can't call it science or whatever, but that doesn't mean it's not real.
Totally. And I inherently understand the pitfalls in this because yes, to be able to reduce something down to something empirical, like a mathematical equation that you can say, okay, that really does describe behavior of a system, right? That's important. But to discount the phenomenological completely from that is clear. It's clearly not a full picture of reality, right? Yep. Like everybody, I think, listening would say, yeah, my actual lived experience is a lot more important than a math equation that describes something true about reality. But, as I'm saying that, there's kind of an interesting contradiction in my mind because in some ways, the esoteric point of view, particularly from a Pythagorean or Platonic point of view, would be like, no, the equation is important because you've identified like a thought of God essentially by pinning down a portion of reality, like you've glimpsed that higher truth. And the mathematical notation is not the totality of that truth, but it's a kind of truth that you can't get to through just language. But at the same time, the experience is like the other side of that same exact coin. And I don't know if there's a system we could create that could really encompass the two, but I think that's the game we should all be trying to think of about the future of science and knowledge acquisition is how do you synthesize
Oh, yeah.
consciousness and the empirical part of it?
Total. And there are people who study, they call it, like, Platonic number theorists
Right.
and stuff like now. Like, there's like that Novak guy who was kind of implicated in the Epstein stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. But, I think he's.
Well, Penrose calls himself a mathematical
But
Platonist.
Penrose does. I think Michael Levin holds a Platonic, group or whatever around this stuff. So
Levin's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Super cool guy. So
biological entities are interfaces for higher minds or something is one of my favorite quotes of his.
Whoa, that's wild. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's some sort of like tesseract, tesseract is like a placeholder for a Platonic object, like a soul state, in like a less compressed reality that's like
or an uncollapsed,
like a Hilbert
potential
space thing that's like attached to like our bodies or something. And that's wild. And biological morphology like has these like Platonic proto-architectures to them, like built in or something. And and like your Sheldrake kind of talks about things like adjacent to this as well. And yeah, I think all that stuff's just so fascinating. And the way I would reconcile the contradiction that you just mentioned, which you kind of touched on yourself, is like, I wouldn't say that there won't be future math that won't be able to describe this stuff. I think you'd expect there to be future math, but just because the math hasn't come doesn't mean you can discard the phenomena. And I would say, that's how good science works, is the interplay between like hypotheses and theory and experimentation. And if you don't have, the third element that like people don't mention is like the imagination that allows you to like come up with the hypotheses and the theory. And if you like eliminate the imagination, that's like kind of crazy. And then the imagination, the final thing could be based on like real phenomena that like occur to you, but like or happen to you, but like you can't explain it currently through our modern scientific lens or whatever. So it's just like a more complete picture of, I think, the good science that's like already been done.
100%. And let's start a prog rock band called Future Math, by the way.
Yeah, I love it. That's great.
We've already taken a massive digression from Parsons. We've already taken a massive digression from Parsons. But we have to mention the L. Ron Hubbard connection because it's just such a weird one. So L. Ron Hubbard, who obviously probably most people listening know as the founder of Scientology, falls into his orbit at a certain point. I'm unclear as to how he comes into the picture, but he becomes part of the fold, like really directly, and he's serving as the scryer in a lot of these rituals that they're doing. So for people that don't know, in a lot of these ritual magic contexts, you have somebody who's doing like the evocation, or they're reading the thing or saying whatever within the ritualistic context. And then you have somebody who's trying to visualize, usually in like an obsidian mirror or some other form where you're trying to bring an intelligence down into like a mirror or something, and you're trying to communicate it with it through the mirror. And this is also the same arrangement. Like if you ever look into the Enochian stuff with John Dee and Edward Kelly, Kelly is the scryer, and et cetera. So anyway, so they're working like very, very closely for a while. And it's yet another one of these strange historical threads that intersect for a time. And then, of course, as you know, Hubbard eventually runs off with his lady. He runs off with Parsons' lady.
Yeah.
But do you know what happens after that?
I think Parsons like sends a curse out to them, and they're like at sea or whatever, and they like get into like a literal shipwreck because of Parsons' like hex or whatever.
He summons like the spirit of Mars after him. So meaning like the war, essentially, right? Like violence, war. And I believe it's like Bartzabel or something. Like Bartzabel is one of like the Mars spirits. He does some kind of like Bartzabel evocation and like literally sinks L. Ron Hubbard's ship. It's so crazy.
That's so crazy.
And then how weirdly poetic is it that his story ends with, it's also just striking me how this dude's just a perpetual impulsive gate crasher his entire life, right? He's literally going out in the desert as a teenager and blowing things up. Then he's blowing things up psychically through ritual magic. And then the very last culmination of it all is he blows himself up.
I think no, it's insane. It's like a modern Faustian myth, and I think this is like an apocryphal part of the story, and I don't know if this is true, but I like urge your audience to research this. I think they would do past life regressions as part of the Golden Dawn and the OTO, and so I think he did a couple, like there are like multiple past lives that you've led, and I think 2 of his past lives. One, I believe, was Simon of Magus.
Whoa.
Who is literally this, simony is named because like, it's like you're paying for a higher position in the clergy and church or whatever. And like, I think Peter and Paul like walked by Simon and he was like levitating based on black magic. He was levitating and they could levitate higher because they had like the power of God. And then he asked to pay for their powers. So like, if that's true, that is this past life regression between Parsons and that is so weird. And it kind of comports with this, like everybody having this demonic mythological undergirding for their own life that like drops hints here and there of like what they're supposed to do. So like that's wild. And I think another, past life regression of his was the Templars. And the Templars, there are all sorts of myths about them of like, they have the secrets of time travel and, who knows? But the really crazy one is the Simon of Magus one. So somebody should look that up because I always say it and then I say it's apocryphal and I don't know, but I'll try to research it too. But
yeah, that's crazy. No, I do want to get deeper into Parsons' story because I'm just intrigued as hell by all of it. But we have to talk about the Nazi stuff too.
Yeah,
that's another just really fun, not only part of that video, but part of history that again is one of the go-tos in terms of the overlap between technology, the occult, and potential UFO stuff. You may know this history better than me, so I'm not even going to like set it up. I'm just going to kick it over to you. I'm guessing it probably starts with Himmler. Himmler's probably the figure on the Nazi side of things that really is the kind of main node that a lot of this emanates out of.
Yeah, well, Himmler was definitely weird on the occult side.
Yes.
So he like would have, the black sun on the, the Nazi patch. And then he'd go to Mount Kailash and like, and like go on these quests for like, the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant and like all that stuff. You also had Rudolf Hess, who I think was a fan of Rudolf Steiner. So like, and then I think eventually the Nazis like banned Rudolf Steiner, but like you had a lot of these guys who were interested in like the Blavatsky-esque, occult like root races, and they were harkening back to the the Hyperboreans or whatever,
or the Atlanteans,
the third root race or whatever. So that was definitely a thing. And then I think Hitler himself was just much more kind of simple and like maybe intrigued by some of this stuff as far as it could confer power, but like I don't know if he was himself an occultist. And then they also were experimenting with like extremely out there propulsion modalities and science. And that guy was a guy named Hans Kammler, who's this ruthless SS officer who had this thing called Kammlerstab in modern day Czechoslovakia and Poland and Breslau and Pilsen. And they were building flying saucers. Like that is like true. Like definitely they were building these flying saucers.
The Bell, right?
Yeah, the Die Glocke was under Kammlerstab, exactly, which was this like Ernest Grawitz, who was an SS medical officer who worked, I think Joseph Mengele worked for him. I think he was the head of the SS medical division. He was part of this. And then another guy named Walter Gerlach, who was like a very interested in gravity, and he was a physicist at a local university, were involved in these experiments. And the idea was that you create these sort of torsion fields. It would be like extremely high voltage, experiment. You'd have this inner kind of ceramic chamber where basically time, like, in general relativity, like time and energy are, time is, very related to energy, obviously. and time and gravity are very related.
Yeah.
And the denser the gravitational source, the more time slows, just like a black hole. And so, if you create this sort of, basically the only way to like create, high gravitational sources are through mass and energy. So you get like a huge planet, or you do these crazy experiments.
Magnetized electricity. We were talking about earlier.
Well, all electromagnetism is magnetized. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, that's true. No, and I don't know if we said this on the recording, but I'll just throw this in there.
Yeah,
I didn't even like think about the fact that the Nazis could have been well aware of this Eliphas Levi thing that I brought up earlier. So for the audience, if I didn't say this on the air, Eliphas Levi, he's this famous esotericist in the I believe it's like the late 19th century. He talks about this mysterious magical substance, or the magical agent, calls it azoth. Never says what it is, except for in one specific book that my friend Ike told me about on a recent pod. And he says the azoth, the magical agent, is nothing less than magnetized electricity. So again, this is me trying to like cram puzzle pieces together, but for the sake of just making it somewhat plausible, clearly the Nazis are deeply interested in the esoteric and the occult, and they would have known who Eliphas Levi was for sure. So how would they have not gone down that rabbit hole? And maybe there could have been experiments having to do with things along those lines that led to propulsion.
I think there are two different phenomena with the Nazis, to kind of summarize it. Like you had, to finish the Bell thing, they create this like kind of artificial gravitational source which slows down time. Time becomes like, every second it's like actually 1/1000th of a second on the inside of the chamber, and you get forward-looking time travel where like a year goes by and 1,000 years go by for like the person on the inside. They walk out there in 1,000 years in the future. All of this is crazy lore, but you literally you could go and see this test rig. Like this guy Nick Cook did amazing research on this. He wrote a great book called The Hunt for 0 Point, and he got a lot of this from a Polish journalist named Igor Witkowski. And you can literally see a test rig, which looks like it's like this UFO or bell-shaped thing was probably on the inside of it. And then there are underground tunnels in this area, and we know Kammler built a lot of these underground tunnels. There's a guy named Rudolf Schreiber, who's a technician, who claimed that a flying saucer, literally like they got it to fly and would go up 40,000 feet in a few seconds. Another guy named Richard Mita, had plans for a flying saucer. They might have worked with this guy Henri Coanda, who was this Romanian who literally has a patent for a lenticular aerodyne disc in 1936 or 7.
Whoa.
So they were like looking into this hard. And then there was a project in the US documented called the Avro car, which looked like the flying saucers. And they literally looked like flying saucers. You see photos of it like in these NASA like test rigs and stuff. And at first there's a guy John Frost, and it was this British aircraft CIA thing that was started in Canada, and then it got moved to Wright Airfield. And they basically tried to get that whole Kammlerstab team back together to work on this thing.
Yes.
Like rumors are that Mita came over and was working on it. And then they definitely got Coanda, I'm pretty sure, like consulting on, it became this thing called Project Y at Wright Airfield, and he was there. Another guy named Victor Schauberger, this famous naturalist who had also flying saucer diagrams and plans and stuff. They basically stole his work through this, what's the guy's Neil, I forgot the Army counter intel agent. As basically this Army counter intel agent stole all his work.
Okay.
And it ended up in Brookhaven National Labs. Neil Gershleimer, something like that.
I don't know. But then there's also that other supposedly reverse engineered craft that looks very similar to that bell shape. It's the flux liner, right?
Yeah.
Those look,
Mark McCandless.
Super similar shapes.
They look super similar. Yeah. So there's that, like, so with the Nazis, you have two things. You have like nuts and bolts aerospace stuff that like I know they were at least experimenting with. Like I know that. Like, and I think you have to be dogmatic to say that like look at the evidence. Like they were experimenting with this stuff, and it turned into at least experiments with this stuff on the American side for sure. So that's crazy. But then you also had this like Anna Nurbe Thule Society,
Yes.
you know, like occult, what is it, like Morning of the Magicians, like, you know, there's this book about this, this kind of
Is this
thread.
the Vril and all of that stuff?
Yeah, the
too?
Vril
Yeah.
Society and the belief in an underground race, you know, the Edward Dutton book, you know, the coming race or whatever. And like, you know, all this, you know, semi-racist, you know, occult stuff. And like, you know, the Indiana Jones, like, you know, quest for all these sort of like occult knowledge, which was very real too and documented. And then the question is like, did they get anywhere? Also, a modern Faustian story, like, seems like it kind of blew up in their face and they ended up learning a lot of the wrong lessons. And then in the model where like the Heideggerian, you know, this connection to this like higher world is like, you know, translates to tech progress, you do see like, you know, the A4s and V2s in Germany were like way ahead of like any other country, like by far. I mean, Skunkworks was started in the US to combat, you know, Nazi fighter jets, which were ahead of, you know, ours in the US. So like they were in that, you know, you could say that's a product of border science and crazy sort of like human experimentation that like, again, you had like all the rules and regulations of normal society were like out the window. And, you know, that leads to, progress in a very narrow, you know, kind of sociopathic sense, you know, with a lot of cost obviously as well. So like you could say that it was the border science, you could say that it was the weird occult summoning of the, you know, they were more in touch with the sponsors. And then you have the like for sure documented, like they were looking into flying saucers. You have all three of those things. And then do those things collapse neatly into like one thing? I don't quite know.
Right. Yeah. And I'm tempted to get into, it's not even really a digression because we've been talking a lot about the relationship between the phenomenon, UFOs, and consciousness, the esoteric. But that's one of those things I'm always trying to piece together. And maybe instead of doing that, another person who exemplifies that lore in a really interesting way that kind of couches, or maybe he's more contemporary with Parsons actually, is definitely Puharich. Because he's somebody who, I believe he starts out as an MD. He's kind of interested in vital life force energy. And I think he writes a book about it, which I don't remember what it's called, but it's Annie Jacobson in Phenomena talks about it for sure. How he starts as sort of just a fairly straight-laced doctor, but then he develops an interest in vital energy. He might come up with his own name for it, which is, it's funny how that always happens, man, because it's like this Nazi occult group was calling that same energy source Vril. The Vril Society was calling it Vril. But yo, Pneuma, it's the same thing. Prana in the Indian, it's the same thing. It's this mysterious, animating substance, subtle energy substance. And that's another one of those things that could be implicated in all of these psi things, right? Could that have something to do with PK? Could that have something to do specifically with influencing random number generators, other things like that? Who knows? But Puharich goes deep down the rabbit hole, and he starts communicating with disembodied intelligences, like him and Geller start speaking or channeling with a being they believe is called Spectra. And they almost have this little cult that they form around this Spectra intelligence. And then there's the whole, and then he gets deeply hooked in with the intelligence apparatus as well. And these elite circles throughout the country, particularly in New England. And then MK Ultra starts and all these other things downstream of that. So that's another really interesting chapter in this, where maybe it's not directly UFOs, but it's right adjacent, man. If not direct.
No, and Puharich, was it Austining, where he was with the Space Kids in upstate New York? I forget the name of the exact place, but he had these space kids and he would take it, he'd test them. It's kind of like Stranger Things or something.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the channeling sessions, they would say UFO is overhead now. And like they would, you know, channel alien beings. He channeled this group that he called the Nine. One of his channelers was named Phyllis Schlemmer. And she wrote a book called The Only Planet of Choice. And it's this whole mythology of like, this council of nine.
Whoa.
And you know, Earth is this bottleneck of consciousness, and it needs to like ascend to a certain state to like, you know, meet the rest of the, you know, whatever it is, the Galactic Federation style thing that she writes about. And I believe she also inspired part of Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry like was privy to some of these channelings. Yeah, and he's this weird figure where he does seem earnestly interested in consciousness, Puharich, and he's at Northwestern or something, and then definitely gets sucked into some sort of intelligence apparatus, and at the Round Table Institute and in upstate New York just starts studying all of these kids. And it's this weird, there's this question that everybody who goes deep on Puharich asks, which I think is valid, which is like, was he a legit believer or was he like a psyoper? And, you know, because he brought Uri Geller actually to the US, and Uri Geller would like wake up like, you know, like he'd get flung through a window, and he was like, you'd wake up like miles away from where he like passed out or something. And like, you'd find out that like Puharich like dosed him up with LSD and was just purely like fucking with him.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of stuff like that going on in Puharich's world. And it's this perennial kind of question of like, you know, what was he up to? And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the craziest thing I've heard, you know, I interviewed this guy, Dan Sherman.
Oh, yeah. No, like, I'm very interested in the Above Black story.
Yeah. It's a wild story.
I haven't read it, but I watched your interview.
Such a wild
and
story.
Found him to be super compelling.
Oh, yeah.
all the intangible parts of just him being a human being, incredibly compelling.
I came out of there and like, you know, forget the details. I mean, the details are like extremely important and they all seem to line up.
Yeah.
Like you can stress test like the bases, and he took a photo of the base in his book before, you know, it was pre-internet. So he probably expected this to not get out. And we basically like reverse image searched it and figured out that it was San Vito de Normandy in Italy, and that it was closed down and matched the full description of what he described or whatever. By the way, this is a guy for the audience who literally, you know, claimed that he was taken to this nondescript, you know, NSA complex in Maryland, which while he was doing continuing education for his electronics intelligence work as an Air Force, you know, sergeant, and was, you know, took these like pills and then they basically were like telling him to hum tones in his mind that matched what he was hearing over the headphones. And he was told to lock in and then collapse a sine wave, and which is so crazy. So like gain control over this like sine wave. And apparently, and I don't know if this is true, but my friend who is like one of the deepest Puharich research, like he spent like the last 10 years looking into Puharich.
Is this the guy who made the documentary?
Yeah, Greg Maloney.
I just connected with him too.
Great dude. Yeah. So cool. So he was like, I freaked out around watching your Dan Sherman interview because that machine sounds exactly like the stuff that Puharich, it's like it went black and like it went, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And you have his people, the space kids and stuff, saying that they're channeling aliens.
Yeah.
And then,
so I don't know if we said, because I don't want to brush past this point, but so the story of Dan Sherman is somebody who he's an Ellent officer. He's trying to get some kind of certification to become one. It's the other two, or he is. He
is one is continuing education.
Yes.
He's like upgrading his skills or whatever.
And then he keeps getting pulled into something where he's clearly not aware of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like you said, he's made to take these pills, and then eventually he realizes he's somehow psychically tapping in to some other consciousness or alien intelligence, or I don't get the sense that he felt like he was connecting with aliens, like embodied aliens. Or you tell me, because you talked to him and you've probably read the book, and I haven't read the book. I just know the broad strokes.
Yeah, I don't think he got. I don't know if he got the sense that. I was like, do you know what they looked like? And he never knew, never got a visual, nothing like that. I was like, how do you know they were alien? He was like, the way they spoke was so out of accordance with the way human semantic communication occurred.
Yeah.
So like there is this lingering question that I think is super valid that I asked him on the spot, and that I found him refreshingly non-dogmatic in his answer about, which is like, is this parapsychology tagged with aliens, or is this aliens doing parapsychological stuff?
Or is this a modern manifestation of something like what we were talking about before we were recording, where if we were looking at this in another context, could this be like a consciousness-based, almost like ascent ritual, where you're changing the vibration of your consciousness to another plane of reality by doing these protocols, taking this drug, and that puts you in a place where you're able to develop a communication channel. Because doesn't it sound similar to that potentially in another context?
Totally possible.
Yeah.
Totally possible. And then you're like, okay, then the Guardian class in this example is like psyoping him or the program itself to say that they're aliens or whatever. And so like, is there something about the space alien mythology that is part of the psyop from that priestly class or whatever? I think it's really hard to, whatever this phenomena is, has like such root access 360 control that like, I'm not sure we'll ever know the answer to that question.
Has anyone ever tried to debunk him? Like, has anyone said, oh, this is like a Yankee Blue thing, or he was being fucked with, or, something where he thought he was doing something, but it was, has there ever been an official?
Dude, I always, I always think we need like better debunks. These things don't touch reality is the funny thing. Like, it's like Megyn Kelly brought up the thing on her show and she was like, I don't know what to make of this. This sounds crazy or whatever. Like, look into it. Like, and
you need a shirt that says look into it.
I seriously. And, even if it like ends up collapsing, like, great. That's awesome. Like, I think there's some new evidence around the tridactyl mummies in Peru, which feel like pretty, I don't want to say fully damning. I don't think they're I think
really?
I think a victory lap on the debunk side is maybe a little premature.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty damning.
What happened with that? Because last I heard, and also from talking to another mutual friend who's really into it, I was feeling more like, damn, there seems to be a lot of evidence for these being legit and maybe not alien, but at least some kind of extremely strange genetic, maybe evidence of some sort of like higher technology that existed way too long ago to fit into our conventional history.
Well, it's funny. Since I'd done my piece, I think doctor from NASA, Donna Roberts, has gone down. Anna Brady Estevez, from former National Science Foundation director, has gone down. And like, they're like pretty all in. Like, they're excited about this and they think there's something legit here. Okay. You obviously have all these forensic guys who looked for mutilations of the fingers and toes. David Ruiz, who's Peruvian, John McDowell, who's American, and Jose Zalce in Mexico, and all of those guys are like, this no mutilation. Since then, my buddy Will Brown at Incredihistory History, who has a great channel, has done some, and he was a source actually for my first piece. And he has interviewed a couple of guys, Dr. Dan Proctor, another guy, Dr. Joseph Morrison.
Great name for a doctor.
Yeah, Proctor. yeah, exactly. Or the worst name.
Depending on what kind of Proctor.
Depending on what kind of, But great guys. Super, like, I have zero, like, not bad faith actors. Like, I got no bad vibes from them. And they were like, we think that these are metacarpals that are in the, like, center digits of these aliens. I still think there's work to be done. And so they're like, these are all human bones, and they're using these like bizarre like rehydration techniques. And then they're like moving the bones around and then dehydrating them, and then the diatomaceous earth and like really like kind of pastes over like the mistakes made. If that's true, it's the weirdest, most sophisticated hoax ever.
And that's the thing is, like, you can't. There are things like, to you and I and to any sane person, we look at something like that and think, how could anyone want to do something like this? Saying it's a hoax is, I think that's too light of a word. Clearly, it was like a deep passion project for some kind of autistic genius nerd who I can't even begin to imagine what their list of interests must be. But that whole land is cartel land. It's also fucking full of hoaxes. There's these Ica stones that show up in the 60s and 70s with spacefaring people. And the weird thing is there's weird cave art there that is real, but the spacefaring people and it looks like UFOs and aliens, and like, I think those are pretty fake. Okay. And then, but the weird thing about getting a signal to noise is like, you'd expect, if the bodies were real, you'd expect these people to like make fake versions and then like sell those on the black market. Where I think these are really good debunks, and this is to the point that, like, we need better debunks, and like
it's great if a thing I cover gets debunked later. I expect many of the stuff I cover many of the things I cover to be wrong. We talked about this before the show, but like if you have 15 things you cover and they're all 30% likely to be true, each one in isolation is more likely not true than true, and not easily debunkable, but like debunkable ideally. But in aggregate, you know, you get a 96.5% chance that one of them is true. And if all of them are paradigm shifting, like that's kind of like the heuristic of the show in some ways. Is like, we need a Hail Mary. Like if you have like type 1 errors and type 2 errors, like the error that is, you know, we can forgive more is the like, let's venture far out and try to like, you know, let's have a hypothesis that you have that turns out not to be true later is way less dangerous actually than the status quo, than like rejecting a possibly true but paradigm shifting hypothesis. So all that's to say, like, I think the mummies thing is a good example where I wouldn't say necessarily definitive debunk, but like your probability analysis has to change.
So your conviction level has gone way down.
Way down. And like, I also think this is important because like for you, just think about it first principle. Like I'm not a specialist in any of these things. So I'm taking all of these things at face value from each specialist. But if you do good thinking on it, you have to kind of take the biological anthropologists a bit more seriously than the forensics
Speaking
people.
Of which, how's Mike Masters not, at least privately?
Well, it's funny. He went on. He was also a source, and he was in my first piece that I did. And he was like super anti, to his credit. Again, I don't even know necessarily want to say to his credit because who knows what ends up happening. But he was super anti, but he didn't give any first principle. He wasn't like this was the, you know, these
technical details.
These look like metacarpals. Like he wasn't like these are bones that were like moved, and like this is the thumb socket where the thumb was removed. You know, like that's like really good first principles. You know, evidence. He was like, I don't want to look at it, man. Like he was like that. You know, it's just these Walkeros, and like maybe that heuristic was correct on his part. Maybe that high level heuristic. But so yeah, all that's to say, I think that was a good debunk. In the Sherman case, I don't know, man. It's tough because there's a FOIA request, and I really want to get in touch with this guy Noah Rodek. If anybody can get me in touch with him, please make the intro, because like this guy did a FOIA request for Project Preserve Destiny, which had only been discussed in, you know, Sherman's book, and I believe he FOIA'd the Air Force, and the Air Force forwarded it to the NSA. So to me, that's like kind of a tell that like the program exists. He said like all the records around this project should go to the NSA, and then the NSA is like, you know, can't confirm or deny or whatever. So it's like, and then citing national security. So like you could say the NSA thing's a non-answer, but I think it's a tell that like the Air Force is forwarding this stuff to the NSA. The question I have on the Rodek FOIA request is like, was his name mentioned? And then you could end up in this like weird circular reporting thing.
Dan Sherman's name.
Yeah. Still, a FOIA request is a FOIA request. And I think that's a pretty standard process. And if they changed that because they mentioned the name through some sophisticated PSYOP thing, like that feels a little, even that itself feels a little beyond the pale to me. Like I'd love to see another example where that's ever been done. So that feels like good evidence. You know, the bases he was at, we kind of like reverse engineered. We have his DD-214. We have his honorable discharge. Like I've gone deep with a guy who is named Dan Hogg, who is a fellow Elinter, who is like everything he says about Elint is like exactly correct. Like he has his like continuing education certificate from the Air Force, like Dan Sherman. And then, so he has like all of that. And then on the intangibles, like I walked out of that room being like, that guy was definitely not lying. And there are people, I walk out of the room and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck to make of that. You know, like I walked out of the room with Charles Hall and I was like, I have no idea. Like that feels crazy to me. You know, I'm gonna present it for the audience can make their own decision or whatever. But like, to be honest, that didn't feel like real to me. With the Sherman thing, And like, no, you know, I
And
look,
it's so weird and unique. It doesn't cleanly fit into any kind of anybody's like fantasy
that's
of
right.
the phenomenon.
If you were writing a script, you wouldn't write that script.
Right.
You'd write another script about like a reverse engineering program. Like you'd write stuff about some of the, like something that sounds like some of the other stories you hear, to be honest. This one,
he doesn't have a messianic, like, I know everything. If anything, he's like, I don't know, man.
No, he has the opposite.
All I can say is this.
That's right. And he would go to these UFO conferences. He was like, I would go to these things, and like you always had the guy with like the, like, you know, the stigmata on his forehead, and I was like, I can't compete with that. And he was just like a funny kind of like a bit of a fucker, you know, like a kind of like a disenchanted, like hilarious sort of way. And and I don't know. He also didn't over signal that he remembered. Like you expect, if somebody, this happened, you know, 30 plus years ago, you'd expect them to like miss a couple of details, and he just didn't try to like fill in the gaps artificially. Clearly, I mentioned that FOIA request from Noah Rodek, and instead of him being like, yes, you see, like that's evidence for my thing, he's like, oh yeah, cool. Like he didn't need to be vindicated at all. He was like, yeah, awesome. Like he was like, that makes sense, you know?
A quick aside while we're on that topic, have you tried to FOIA anything ever?
No, and another thing that we should do, like I feel like me, you, Chris Ramsey, and UAP Gerb should do is like, we need a new FOIA person.
Yeah.
And like I think like John Greenwald's done like a great job, but I also feel like he's like bizarrely skeptical.
I don't know if he would be into this at all.
Yeah.
But Paul Smith used to do that, dude.
Okay.
Paul Smith had something to do with FOIA requests.
That'd be great.
So I mean,
but I think
maybe he could at least be a private person to just bounce like, hey, is this right? Will this work?
I think you need like a young, highly energized, like, you know, just somebody who's just, I think we need somebody to like systematically do this stuff and like just pump them out.
Because the problem is it's like, it's self-hiding in that you need to know what to ask for before you ask for it.
Yep.
Because if it's too broad, you'll end up with nothing, or they'll ask you to be more specific, from my understanding. And you're not going to find that something that's a commonly used turn of phrase. You're not going to find psionic asset, or you're not going to find, you know, UFO, to use them. You're going to find these weird terms that they decided to use in their own weird little nomenclature to keep it esoteric and keep it hidden.
Like Fast Walker, which when John Greenwald FOIA'd, you know, they couldn't, Space Force couldn't talk about it. So,
I actually don't know that story.
Yeah, there are a bunch of these like weird terms like that, fast walker, slow walker, that sort of thing, where, you know, it seems like you get, I mean, another weird example recently, and there are Occam's razor explanations to this, but like 3i Atlas, like the CIA has records on 3i Atlas.
I saw that.
Those records could be like, mass hysteria could be touched off in the 0.0001% chance this is like, you know, an artificial object from, you know, but
now that we're talking about this, did you see this new supposed leak about some date this year? There being some sort of leaked analysis of gravitational waves saying that everything is going to levitate on Earth, or there's a chance everything's going to levitate on Earth for a certain amount of seconds. And if this happens, here's the potential like death count and like stuff like that. I have no idea if there's anything legit about this whatsoever. But I just I saw it's like going around with a specific date of like August of this year sometime. Where I put it on the calendar. I'm like, just in case I might stay inside that. But yeah, man, I never know what to make of those things, or what to make of any potential leak, which I don't want to get into the sense-making part of the conversation yet, because there's a lot of fun things we haven't touched on yet. But at some point we should have that conversation. Did I derail you on any of the Dan Sherman stuff? Or?
No. I just think that's like one of my higher conviction things that and I think it's, I try to just like, you know, ask normal, reasonable audience surrogate questions and let, you know, people sort of decide, and like I'm not promoting any single case, promoting inquiry into all of the cases, whatever that leads. But I do think sometimes weighing in a little bit on shows like yours, where I can give some like meta analysis of like, I'm a little higher conviction on this than this, is helpful.
Yeah.
And like he would be one where and especially to the extent that like the personal intangible stuff comes through when you're with a person, and eludes you if you're like through a screen. And like that guy, like, seemed just, and my girlfriend was there and she felt the same way. She's like, that happened to him for sure, And we've come out of other things where we're like,
yeah, big green flags from him. Either that, or he's like such a sociopath that he's just like an incredible, or he's conflating, right? He believes what he's saying, but yeah, man, I've got the exact same impression from him. One of the other major parts of this is our relationship to the cosmos in general, right? Because we, from a modern scientific, physicalist, reductionist kind of point of view, we think of that as just being this massive physical, mostly empty space filled with rocks that have no consciousness. And it's mostly just like chaos and uncaring, frigid oblivion out there, right? But the ancients had a very different understanding of what the earth was, about what the cosmos was. I mean, again, I'm going to like mostly resist going down the rabbit hole of the ancient esoteric worldview, but I think it is somewhat germane to the conversation. To them, stars were gods. They were like physical manifestations of hypercosmic intelligences, basically, that were leaking into the physical world through the sheer awe of their presence, or even if they're in these deeper, like just emanating from these deeper layers of non-physical reality or whatever. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's more modern manifestations that lead to a similar kind of, or could at least lead to a similar kind of conclusion, like cosmism, which you also talk about in the video, which is this mostly Russian kind of early 20th century, right? Sort of like with people like Tsiolkovsky, who really believe that it's human destiny to go into the cosmos, to populate the cosmos, bring light and wisdom, whatever. And also, I don't know if I probably haven't told you the story, but that is a common theme for me, man. Anytime I have a profound psychedelic trip, it usually starts out with a certain kind of narrative grammar that eventually leads to that. Like the point of being a human is to work together, get off this planet and spread light and consciousness. And like, I had this, I won't get deep into it now, but essentially like this vision of we are this lonely, threatened flower in an ocean of, nothingness, essentially, unless we do something about that, unless we pollinate the next node over. So I've had visions like that too, man, where maybe I'm tapping into the same thing the cosmists were tapping into. But you said that does come from a little bit of a different spiritual persuasion, but still, it's like, it's so similar that it's very suggestive of there being this latent strain. And it does resonate with me, this idea that somehow we're meant to go to the stars. And maybe that's coming from some deeper place, deeper psychological place, but it resonates with me.
No, it resonates so much with me too. I think it's this archetypal kind of psychological thing. And then is the psychological actually, is the manifestation of like a cosmological worldview that is more meaningful than the the Bertrand Russell, look out, see the stars, and the beauty of the randomness of it all. It's actually maybe this deeply meaningful thing. I don't know. I think simultaneously you have to acknowledge the archetypal human desire to escape the constraints of the single central point of failure of Earth, and pollinating other places. And there are really interesting models of mycelium and mushrooms possibly being civilizations that maybe kind of capsules, cosmic capsules, because they withstand high radiation.
And McKenna thought, or he at least played with that idea.
Yeah, well, even Francis Crick wrote a book called What is Life in 1981. He wrote a paper on directed panspermia in 1973, and it was basically you have because he believed that it was like 100 million years was like too fast for DNA to form on Earth. So you have the guy discovering the double helical structure on DNA, doubting the kind of primordial soup hypothesis, and which is crazy. And so he was like, well, we needed to have had some sort of like, directed panspermia, which is basically like a seeding of Earth.
Yeah.
And if you look at mycelium, they're closer to animal DNA than human and plant DNA, which is really interesting. In fact, we're susceptible to fungal diseases because our DNA is so similar, because we mistake, fungus for our own tissue very easily. And then you get into like, okay, we all have a microbiome, but we also have a mycobiome. And then we talk about the gut-mind connection. But what about the mycobiome-mind connection? Like, it's passé to talk about one. Shouldn't the other be like really important as well? And then you get into like cordyceps mushrooms controlling the bodies of bullet ants in the Amazon, like taking over their bodies. Last of Us. So and then you get like Terrence McKenna literally was on a mushroom trip, and it was like this in the Song of the Mushroom. The mushroom says to him, like, within my memory exists the blueprints for these hyper light drive ships.
Whoa.
And like, I'm going to take you off Earth with my knowledge.
How have I not heard this one?
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. So like, then you get into like, what would be like the most adaptive extraterrestrial civilization? Would it be like a gangly, awkward, like hominid that would like show up, be treated as a foreign invader and like shot at immediately? Or would it be like a memory capsule of consciousness that would become a symbiote with the vessel that is the like host civilization, a la humans, ingratiate, kind of like become part of them, change the way they think in sort of a subtle way, maybe affect the way they perceive reality themselves, in sort of fundamental ways. So like, that's just fascinating to me. But I will say, like, there's also this other model of like reality where like, it is this more deterministic or like, kind of just random causal sort of thing where like, I don't see a ton of evidence to, you get into like astrology territory with, I will say this on our cosmological models. You have a scaling problem. Like, I think in a lot of cases you have scaling problems, and you get like kind of error propagation at higher and higher scales, like in a lot of things. You think of like governance as like you have a scaling problem with governance, or like with like, computer code, like you get error propagation with like a little bit of wrong computer code. Anytime you try to scale a thing and there's like a bug, the bug scales too.
Right.
And
so reminds me of the errant cause, by the way, Platonic milieu, but keep going. Yeah.
Well, I want to get into that, but all that's just to say that like, you have every reason to believe that our cosmological model of the universe is like way off.
Yeah.
Because
probably.
if you have low scale issues or anomalies in physics, which like we do have like, questions we're grappling with at low scale, it's like a rocket that's like 1 degree off course. Like, you're going to end up like completely wrong territory, at macro scales. And so like, my guess would be that you even look at like dark energy, and it's like, you like, what is dark energy? And it's like, it's a force that's not one of the 4 fundamental forces, but it's like, it's kind of like an anti-gravity style thing. You ask like Avi Loeb, like, do we have anti-gravity? Like, dark energy. And they're like, wait, what? Like, but so you're just like there are all these like placeholders in our cosmology that like, even dark matter justifies gravity's weakness, right? It's like, it's just patchwork on patchwork.
Totally.
And so that's to say, is like imbuing all of that stuff with meaning that crazy. I definitely don't in the mythological sense. I do think it's taking like leaps of logic. Like we have to admit, like, we don't have evidence for a lot of this stuff as far as the stars being gods, but simultaneously, I think we need to like maintain a ton of epistemic humility around like our current models, which are just feel like probably pretty flawed.
Well, that's one of the fun implications of that now overly battered Rupert Sheldrake riff, right? Like about like, why shouldn't the sun be conscious? It's infinitely more complex than we are. Well, it wouldn't just be our sun. It would be everything, right? It would be like every star in the night sky would be some kind of insane locus of consciousness that we can't even begin to understand. But there's so much more there. And, that makes me think that maybe cosmism and this thirst to physically go traverse the stars, maybe that is a conflation of something else, And this starts to get into some of the Lavenda stuff and deeper into some of the more ancient esoteric stuff, which is there was clearly this commonly understood thread running throughout cultures that you could somehow with your consciousness do these cosmic ascent rituals and literally go to the cosmos. And that when you would die, you would go into the cosmos, you'd go into the Milky Way, you'd perhaps, pass through the Dipper constellation, as we were talking about before too, where there's just so much intriguing lore around that. But yeah, whether it's Taoist sages or Platonists or Hermeticists or Indian yogis or whatever, all of them seem to have these cosmic ascent rituals where you would literally somehow ascend these strata of different layers of reality that had guard deities that you had to give passwords to, and each one would correspond to some kind of archetypal intelligence. In the Hermetic sense, what you were trying to do is get beyond the 7 spheres to get to the 8th, and then you would be basically back to your souls. Like we were talking about before, maybe a lot of the problem when it comes to connecting to that higher intelligence, maybe that's stemming from essentially egoic dirtiness or worldly dirtiness. And that's what you're trying to do in the Hermetic milieu, is you're trying to remove those layers, those accretions, those astral accretions, and get back to this pure place. And if you can get through all those spheres and take off all those archetypal layers, you're back to basically reflecting the absolute. And then you can sort of remerge with the Godhead or, the one or whatever. Maybe that's the thirst. Maybe the thirst is to return to our source, and it's not literally through going to outer space, but maybe that's a symbolic representation of what we really need to do.
Well, I could steel man the going through space as like a Hermetic ritual, right, where like you are expanding your consciousness.
Right.
Like if it was like you have Werner von Braun who's like he's saying like you should experiment with ESP at these levels. You have all this Freemasonic symbology in early space program stuff where you definitely have some sort of like celestial ascent aspect to the kind of underpinning mythology behind it. And then you have the overview effect that everybody says they feel like, it's like the tribalism on Earth is so senseless. And you have Edgar Mitchell coming back, like converted basically. Yeah. And so like, there's definitely like this question of like, are you like as you go like into deeper space, like is that having some sort of effect on your consciousness where it is this forcing function for like more purity or like, who the hell knows?
And we don't know, like we don't know obviously, because the class of people who has gone off planet at this point is so small, right? Even to this day, with all of the space missions or supposed space missions, depending on what you believe or don't believe, it's still a really small number of people. So if there is some sort of consciousness effect, we don't know what that would be, or if there is immediately something that is made clear to you through leaving the Earth, we just don't know what that would be, because that's a small enough population of people that you could easily control it, right? But there's all the again, speaking of weird smoke and not knowing what to do with it, one of the things that comes to mind is that I know you've riffed on before is just after the moon landing, right? The appearance of everybody's faces at that press conference. They all just look confused or dejected or disappointed or like they can't say what they want to say or something.
Yes.
And it's, man, so again, it's, I don't know what to make of that or what to make of anything I just said, but it's all fun.
No, it is fun. And, well, what you would make of it is like there is something more to like the inner reflecting the outer. Yeah. And so if you think about the outer as like, the forest breaches, of space and as you ascend into them, there is some sort of like spiritual purification, or like there's this thing you have to undergo. And if you don't undergo it, you become kind of traumatized and an alcoholic, like some of the astronauts did, or something. Yeah. It's like a psychedelic trip gone wrong or something. Yeah, maybe. Or if you maybe you do have the level that you need to be at, and then you come back and you're like Edgar Mitchell and you study parapsychology, and you're like you are trying to convince like presidents of various countries to like disclose the alien truth or whatever. I don't know. All this stuff is kind of fun to speculate on, but. Yeah, if the inner and the outer is sort of lined up in some ways, then you know, maybe what you're hinting at is true, and it's hard to say.
You literally took the phrase hinting at out of my mind, because I was going to say one of the other things this could potentially be hinting at is the notion that there are these outward physical things that occur that are symbolic of something deeper going on behind the scenes of reality.
Yeah, that would be,
and you could take that bidirectionally too. Like maybe the things are like constellating in a Jungian way because something is occurring in the collective unconscious or in the ether, and then it's just like the ether is pregnant with something, and that has to culminate in space travel or an assassination or a war or some a pandemic or something, like something that just shifts history because there's something percolating psychically, and then it must come out in some way. But you could think of it in the other direction too, like maybe something we're doing is having an impact on that plane of reality.
I don't know. I don't either. You're getting into very deep, hard to answer, but the most interesting questions to ponder.
Yes, for sure. One of the other most interesting questions to ponder also has to do with looking out into the cosmos and feeling like in some strange way we belong there and need to return there. The other reason for that is because we literally are like physically from there in a sort of like Lavenda ancient aliens kind of way. Or I guess like, or for, maybe people are more familiar with Von Daniken, but that like we really are at least descended from something that came from somewhere else. And now we have this weird nebulous homesickness for something because we really are some kind of bastard child of something else. And this gets into some pretty crazy, dark, speculative territory that eventually ends up in a place where everybody online is going to say they want catastrophic disclosure, right? But there's some things on this trajectory that I truly do think would be ontologically disruptive enough if they came out.
Like what?
Like if we're a failed science experiment or like an abandoned, the typical Sitchin's Anunnaki kind of narrative that like, oh, we literally were just monkeys implanted with just enough quintessence or intelligence or whatever to just serve a purpose, and then we were discarded. And we're just like left to deal with that. And
that would somehow, I think that could be extremely demoralizing. And lead to nihilism. And then I also think that could be just this kind of watershed moment and kind of axial age, bring about like just a complete reevaluation of like how we live and what we do with our life. So like, I think all these things have like these interesting flip sides, and, maybe it would be somewhat disruptive to establishment power structures or something, but I don't know, even that would be just interesting, It
would be very interesting for sure. And one of the other implications of that seems to be that we've been neutered of some kind of capabilities that whatever they are had. And it seems like the low-hanging fruit there would be psychical, right? Or consciousness-based.
Sure.
That we have been sort of, again, given just enough of that to operate on the level of logos, higher understanding, mathematics, engineering, because we need that, right? A worker class would need that to do anything other than be like a slobbering animal that wants to just like reproduce and follow Darwinian law or whatever. So we've like got just enough of it, but not enough of it to be a threat or enough of it to do anything truly Promethean against whatever they are. And that's another shitty place to be in, right? To like know that you've got like just a hint of whatever that is, but not enough to do anything meaningful.
Yes. Yeah, that would be yeah. You were great once, and now you just have like 1% of the powers that would suck. I do think there's something about the Sitchin stuff that, it's like so clearly extremely speculative and like not corroborated by at least a ton of real evidence. And yet clearly hits this like latent nerve with people that points to maybe like some sort of like latent belief that people have about society and the way it was formed. I mean, even just ask the basic question, right? So human Homo sapiens have been physiologically the exact same for the last 200 to 300,000 years.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that only in the last 5% of our existence, culture, urbanization, religion, all modern technology, that's the only, that little blip, that generously 5%, maybe lower percent of our being the exact same physiologically, or pretty much the same physiologically, you know, notwithstanding extremely slow changes in evolution. Like, that's when we get this just like crazy explosion, eruption of like all of this like human culture. And like, I think it's a really valid, and then you get into all this stuff with Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, where you have cataclysms where you wouldn't have any evidence of like, you know, past stuff. And so I think it's super valid to think that and then you have all these mythological religious stories where it's like, what is that? That could just be this game of telephone. And then the modern you mentioned Peter Levenda. Peter Levenda, you know, has become kind of this like CIA darling child, where he seems like he's like getting out these like hardcore truths with you know, these books that he's written with Tom DeLonge, you know, Secret Machines, and, you know, is it Man, God, and War or whatever?
I know it's Gods, it might be Gods and War or something.
Man, War, and it's all about, and you know, it's like, I think he wrote that like humanity is like a cargo cult. Like we had this contact event, and we're like, all religion and culture is like trying to get back to like the source of that. And like, you have these generals, like you have these guys like Neil McCaslin, who we know for a fact was like, you know, Air Force Research Laboratory, like acquisitions guy. And like, I believe was that like you know, Wright Patterson, you know, airfield, like working in like very serious, like I think working in foreign material exploitation. And like, he's coming to Levenda being like, oh, like you're writing about the cargo cult stuff. Like that's legit, you know? And like, again, who the hell know? You have to look at that through a suspicious hermeneutic of like, it's coming from the government. Like maybe they're trying to psy up us through Levenda, but like maybe not. Maybe they're trying to come out with a sanitized version of a thing that they think is true, and they want it to come out in this kind of limited hangout way, and they want the skeptics to have at it and to be able to debunk it because they want to see how people react. And, and you have other examples of this, like that book Adam and Eve by Thomas Chan, which also involved like cyclical cataclysms and pole shifts. And, you know, Charles Hapgood style stuff. And I believe Curtis LeMay was like a fan of that book. And like, so you get into these questions of like, is there like, you know, does like the quote unquote deep state like know about like bigger questions like ontologically? And like I lean that they might have some asymmetric data on it, but I lean that they don't actually. And Levenda does too. Levenda would say like, they don't have this metaphysical version of reality that's like super discrete and concrete, and like, you know, disclosure is like this single step process of them letting that out, and we just don't know any of it. Like that doesn't feel right to me. I think they're kind of groping in the dark with the rest of us, just with like a lot more and better data, but that data is also compartmentalized.
It's like, what if you had a craft? How much does that help or hurt your hypothesis?
I'm pretty convinced that I think if we have like saucers and hangers, that we don't really know how to use them. That would be my like strong base case. But I mean, you do have like with the Mark McCandlish story, you have stories that are like, but they're few and far between. And then you have, you know, UAP Gerb, who I trust him a lot as far as
his research is.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I really admire the depth that he goes to on that shit.
It's incredible. I would love to see through him some of these guys who are like modern versions of Bob Lazar come out, who've like actually worked on the craft. And I totally respect that his angle is more like, you know, shepherding them through the right processes or whatever. But like, if you have any other examples of that, we have so little to go on in the public for, you know, real like reverse engineering progress being made. That
I guess like the Lukatsky stuff might be the most.
Lukatsky said he stepped inside the hull. He breached the hull, stepped inside the UFO. But like, that's a point in the direction that they haven't made progress, because that's Lockheed Martin trying to probably an exasperated Lockheed Martin trying to transfer material that they probably did. If Lockheed Martin knew what to do with that thing, they wouldn't be transferring it. Right. They had been stuck at like between 100 and 130 billion market cap for the last few years. Like they're not like quarter over quarter growth runs the day if you're a corporate, corporation. So like, the idea that they would just be like Bigelow Aerospace, like, come look at this. Like we know how to use it, but we want to see if you know how to get, like, give me a break.
Yeah. And weird evocative stuff of esoteric things comes out of there too. Like in this video, you talk about that speech Ryder gave about the garment of God or whatever. And I wanted to watch that. Is that talk up anywhere?
Yeah, it's online. It's on YouTube. And it's called Garment of the Gods, I think. And it's this Jim Ryder, who's definitely a VP.
Yes.
Lockheed Martin, they're, in space systems specifically. Take James Ryder, former vice president of Lockheed Martin and a director at Skunkworks. In 2018, he gave a talk called The Garment of God. In it, he emphasized the relationship between mysticism, consciousness, and technological progress. In a separate lecture focused entirely on UAPs, Ryder spoke openly about ritual, altered states, and the overlap between ancient spiritual entities and modern contact experiences. And you have people now saying like he was part of the legacy program with UFOs and he, knew all about the UFO stuff. And I think he's speaking at Lucis Trust or whatever, which is like, this like esoteric occult publication. And he says a bunch of things. He says like, we know ESP is real. And like, in the US, it's just super stigmatized, but in China and Russia, if you talk about this stuff, they don't even bat an eye. Like they know it's so real. He talks about like the veil thinning.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like really trippy, weird stuff. I believe also like, I don't want to spur too much speculation on him, but like, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I think he died in like 2018, but like, I don't think there's like a lot of good data on like what ended up, kind of happening with him.
Like it could have been serious circumstances.
Well, someone was like, but we don't have any records of it. So I don't want to repeat that too much as if I don't want to put too much weight into that. But clearly a very trippy guy, whose worldview didn't comport with what you would expect, normal aerospace executives worldview to be. And then you have all these people now, George Knapp testifying under oath, saying, and a bunch of other people saying.
Nell says a lot of similarly cryptic things, and you can definitely tell that he's interested in both consciousness and the phenomena and understands that there's some kind of unspoken connection there.
100%. And Nell was at SAIC. He was at Wright-Patterson. He was at Army Futures Command. Like he's been at all these crazy places, and he's at Northrop Grumman. He was at Lockheed Martin.
Wow.
And like,
he got like practically all the Infinity Stones.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's he's extremely into the esoteric stuff. Like he's super like talks about like funerary rites and rituals and so like
what did he say about that?
I don't remember exactly, but it was something around, I don't remember.
Well, speaking of funerary rites, that's another thing that is brought up a lot in that. So I just finished that first Secret Machines book, and it's like I was saying, it's sort of like another example of this conversation we're having where he presents so many things. So for people that haven't read it, again, it's like comparative mythology and ufology and esoteric stuff and history and just kind of tying it all together in a way where you're not quite sure exactly what he thinks is going on, but he's pushing forward a few different core scenarios. One is the cargo cult thing. 2 is at least a sort of version of the ancient aliens thing. 3 is sort of a Gnostic take in that maybe we are really stuck here in some capacity on Earth, and our souls know that we do not belong in this form. This form is not our home. This is a weird perversion of what we're meant to be or something like that. So that's all in there. But what he spends a lot of time in one of the chapters talking about funerary rites and how not just the Egyptians, but the Chinese, and again, all these different cultures had burial rituals, and he calls pyramids resurrection machines, which I think is such a dope phrase.
He says that?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, pyramids are resurrection machines.
Whoa.
And that there's this, they're not just astrologically aligned for, like, I'm of the mind that I think, remember when I was talking about before, these telestic arts where you somehow drew divinity down into these places. He's making a similar argument, but that they're doing it specifically for resurrection purposes, so that the soul of that pharaoh or whatever that's buried there can go straight to like where the immortals go.
Dude, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I am so dumb on like the pyramid. Like there's so many people who are like so much smarter than me on like pyramid
Me too.
stuff. But my suspicion is that the pyramid, like the Filippo Biondi stuff around scanning this like kind of energy grid below, like we're going to figure out this model where it's astronomically aligned. You are generating energy, but the energy isn't for like, it's not like some nuclear fusion, ancient advanced civilization. And it's not even for local agriculture. It is actually a funerary ritual that's like a portal.
Yeah, maybe it's like an etheric bridge or something.
Yeah. It's like which literally the movie Stargate with Kurt Russell was, I believe, consulted on by the Air Force. And like, it's really interesting. Yeah. And like it's Stargate, it's like this time travel portal or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think about that. Plus, if you add on top of that the idea that like all these ancient civilizations believed that Orion's belt was like the gateway of the souls, then you have the astronomical alignment. You have this like, torsion chamber, high energy chamber thing like Die Glocke. And like, are you trying to, is it this ancient technology that like zapped the soul into like, some other space or something? Who knows?
Yeah. And one of the things that's so interesting, man, is because think about how different the conclusions are across cultures with burial, right? With the Egyptians, it was of the utmost importance that you preserve the body and that you maintain the body here on earth so that it could somehow correspond in the afterlife, right? Or if you're of the like Hindu persuasion, burn it immediately, like burn the body. Like, who knows? Like, I don't know what I worry about that stuff, man. I also just worry about being like messed with too soon after I die. Yeah, just let me sit there for like 3 days. Let me go through the whole Bardo process before you like throw me in an incinerator or something, or a freezer. But yeah, whatever's going on with that is clearly there was, and I'm not convinced either, because a lot of people like Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, that whole strain of people would say, no, these are not tombs. That's absolutely ridiculous. They've never found a body inside of the pyramids, other than I think the step pyramid, which I think is the, I forget what the step pyramid is called, but it's earlier. It's one of the only periods it's earlier than the three.
Hancock simultaneously says these aren't tombs, but he kind of does imply that they could be sort of celestial ascent chambers or whatever. So like, because I pressed him on that, and he was like, "Well, yeah, of course, the Orion's belt, and that's where the souls go, or whatever." And I don't think he would say that hypothesis super bold. Like I don't think he's sure of that by any means, but I do think he speculates about it.
We're also astrologically and astronomically illiterate. Like if we die and that's really what happens, we're all gonna be so fucked. Honestly, you probably don't want to follow the herd. That's like one of the things that's almost always in all of these traditions.
Don't go to
like,
the light.
Warned against. Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like if you got initiated at Eleusis or you're part of like the Orphic mysteries, it's all about knowing what to do when you die. Like it's all about knowing the password. Like there's one where everybody's essentially journeying. Like you're going to be among all of this herd of dying people, and you're going to be thirsty, and they'll go drink from a river, and you're not supposed to drink from that river, because if you drink from that river, you essentially get annihilated. But if you know the right way to go, you essentially can, I guess, become immortal or go through some kind of apotheosis and get a much better afterlife existent with all the initiated philosophers and stuff like that. And there's like there are these, have you heard of the Orphic lamellae they found people buried with? No. They're like basically buried with this Orphic password. Whoa. And it has to do with, you say something like, I'm the child of rocky earth and starry heaven, and I thirst or something like that.
Whoa.
And you're supposed to tell that to like a guardian of one of the paths, and they let you through.
Whoa.
But if you don't know the password, and again, this is like one of these common features of the cosmic ascent rituals, is like you go through different planes and you need to know the passwords or you won't be let through.
Whoa.
Again, I don't know what to make of it, but I do know that 99.9% of the population ain't going to be knowing what to do. And even if you just take it at a more kind of like plausible, grounded afterlife take, you know, most people who have an NDE, right, they get to a certain point and then they get brought back. But if there's a level where you're going to become increasingly dissociated from your body and your ability to metacognate yourself, you're going to start being taken over by these weird vestiges of what you were, right? And there's this whole, I was actually hoping there was a way I could work this in, because it does have some really weird cosmic ascent corollaries, but also it gets into weird moon stuff.
Whoa.
But do you know Plutarch is the Middle Platonist?
I have Plutarch's Lives. But
Right. So,
but I'm outside of that.
yes. So he's well known to be a biographer.
Yeah.
And we have a ton of excellent writings of his on biographies of famous people from antiquity. But he was also a priest of Apollo, and he was also an initiate of tons of different things. And he tells this story. Let me see if I wrote his name down. Of basically this guy, it's the vision of Aridaeus.
Okay.
And it's kind of similar to the myth of where, you know, there's a guy dies and then goes through the whole grammar of the afterlife bardo situation. But he goes out of his way to say, you're going to think this is a mythos, but this is a logos. This is a true story. So there's this ne'er-do-well guy who basically has like run afoul of everybody in his life. Nobody, like no good relationships, burnt every bridge. He goes to some oracle, basically, how do I like repair my reputation? What do I do? And then she says, you'll do better in death. And he was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm fucked then. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So then he has some kind of accident, goes out of his body, starts going through the afterlife stuff. And it sounds so Bob Monroe, dude. It sounds way more like out of body, astral kind of stuff. Have you read Journeys Out of the Body?
I haven't actually.
Okay. So one of the things Monroe says is like when you're in that state, whatever your sort of desires or like things you're thirsting for, because that's like you're in a mental realm now. You can't fool anything. It's like everything is just seen. So so what you think about or what you're preoccupied with, you go to. So if you're hungry, you're going to start going to that like kind of like dimension of desire, or horny, you're going to go to that like dimension of that or whatever. In this vision, it's almost the exact same thing. It's like everybody's in this weird frenzy of like whatever their karma is, basically, is another way to look at it. Like whatever their worldly attachments are, they're confused and they're trying to cling to all of that kind of stuff. And then there's this like purification thing that I was talking about or alluding to before, where maybe, you know, the worldly stains are kind of holding us down, and that's why we can't go through these ascent planes or whatever. So if with that being the case, those things have to be like burnt out of you. So it's almost like these people, you could think of it as a punishment, and they kind of are framed as a punishment, but it's not just, hey, you're a bad guy and you need to be punished. It's you literally can't ascend the way you are. So we need to like burn that desire out of you. And then it gets to this weird moon part, dude, where he sees the moon as it really is. And there's this intelligence on the moon that he calls the Sibyl of the moon. And the Sibyls, do you know what Sibyls are?
No.
They're like oracles, basically, where they're like these intermediaries for the gods, and they're uttering these prophetic verses. So basically the moon is transmitting some kind of prophetic signal, basically, from this intelligent, like from the gods. And it's sort of like dictating what happens to souls based on their fates and their attachments in the world. So, and then it just goes on and on and on from there. And it's just a super fascinating story. And then he comes back to life and he changes his name and he becomes like a much better person. But yeah, it's a crazy story. And it's one I've been fascinated with ever since I heard.
That's so
Yeah.
interesting. What's it called?
There's the one I was just reading.
It's a Plutarch. It's a Plutarch.
It's from Plutarch. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember like what Plutarch writing it's from.
Yeah.
But it's there's who G.R.S. Mead is.
Mm-mm.
He did a lot of the translations of Hermetic texts and Platonic
Okay.
texts. And I think he was kind of like a practitioner of those philosophies as well. So he went through them. Like if you look up a lot of the public domain translations of Hermetic stuff, you'll see G.R.S. Mead. But yeah, so the translation I was reading was a G.R.S. Mead translation, but I can share it with you.
Well, yeah, please.
It's definitely interesting.
Fascinating.
But yeah, this idea that the true nature of the cosmos gets revealed to you when you unlock this soul sense that they talk about.
Yeah.
Like, and it sounds again so similar to like the Monroe out of body stuff. Like maybe if you master this state, you really can perceive the cosmos in its full ensouled glory, and you can, hear the music of the spheres and see the intelligence or communicate with the intelligences coming off of everything in our solar system. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what points the way through the cosmic ascent after death.
Who knows?
I don't know, dude, but
But I like, I mean, you got to take it as data. It's important to inquire into. And I do think I want to read the Bob Monroe thing. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that comports with the Plutarch version or whatever, maybe there is some sort of common architecture.
But I'm doing the same thing that I love, like you and me are meeting in the middle on so many interesting things, because you definitely started more from UFO interest, and I think anyway, and I started more from esoteric spiritual interest.
Yeah.
And they both like meet in these weird, interesting Venn diagrams. And this is definitely one of them.
They meet, and they also are levels of the same thing. So like I like, they definitely intersect, and then I don't think one often explains every. I sort of think they're layers of things going on. Like there's a more mundane layer. Like there's like the layer of like, where are these programs in the government or whatever, and that's like the UAP GERB is like crushing that sort of thing. And then there's like science and theory, and then there's the experiencer stuff, and all these things I'm curious to see where, if we can make any sort of progress in our lifetime on this stuff.
Well, there's two main prongs I still wanted to touch on in this conversation. One is your own experiences. If there's anything you're open to sharing, because obviously you're seen as this person creating content, like journalistic deep dives into different figures, different stories, different parts of history. But obviously you're also a seeker, and conversations we've had privately, I know sense making is important to you, and having experience is important to you. So I'm curious if there are any sort of benchmark consciousness experiences for you that have been.
Well, it's funny. I always tell like 2 UFO experiences, so I want to give you something different.
Yeah, something good.
Yeah,
and saucy.
I mean, I'll put it high level and just say I've had like a lot of experiences around, like. Yeah, there's something about like I need to know the truth about that, and I think a lot of people like Chris and Ramsey and I talk about this, and he's like, I use the show. Yeah, I think story is the most important thing, and I'm like, I think the truth is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I literally see the show as just like more leverage to get to the truth faster or whatever.
Yeah,
and so I think to the extent I've received like weird synchronicities kind of around that being like this really important kind of focus, like distilling things down. I think the thing I like about Plato, and I'm not like, way more than me about Plato and everyone around him, but it's the trans-political truth seeking. It's like truth that transcends politics.
Yes.
And that is so rare. And if you go on Twitter today, or you go on, even in UFO circles, it's often about the people drama.
Yeah.
And if you go on, any of the news stations, it's all like you get stuck at this layer of like all these conspiratorial truths about politics and about these leaders and and it's just like you're watching like Sports Center, but with like people that like run the world.
Yeah.
And like that's awful, and then there's a version of UFO stuff that like lands in that. That's like really unhealthy. And then there's like the stuff that you're clearly doing a great job of. It's like this modern Platonic search where it's like just like what is going on, you know? And I feel very sort of driven by that. And my friend, you know, you're friends with Adam Curry, so am I.
Mhm.
He worked at the Princeton Parapsychology Lab,
Yeah.
the Paralab. So Adam and I have a mutual friend who worked at the Paralab, and or he kind of helped to run it, honestly. And he has this synchronicity generator, and it's called SyncText.
Whoa.
And it's synctxt.com. You can sign up for it. And the amount of weird messages that I've gotten that have like, it's basically based on random event generators.
Okay.
So if you believe that the mind has any sort of interaction with random quantum, you know, formerly known as random quantum mechanical processes, then you have to think that these synchronicities are not only meaningful, but they're maybe ways to be more aware of them and ways to be less aware of them. And this app is basically like a random, you know, sentence generator, but based on like, you know, REGs. And I've gotten a bunch of crazy, interesting kind of messages and around, you know, from that. And so I don't know. I think for me, it's a lot of it seems to be like revealing stuff to the public that I think, you know, were formerly seen as like, you know, hermetically sealed or whatever. And I don't know why I have that urge to like, you know, kind of break open the existing order and you know, allow people to sort of see it. And yeah, I don't know. I think there are things that are kind of strange, weird in my life that I can't quite explain. Like there's one example is like I was interviewing Diana Pasulka and we talked about this, and like my dad's godfather made the like seminal UFO documentary in the 70s, Rod Serling. He's the creator of the Twilight Zone.
Wow.
And I didn't even know that. And I knew my dad's godfather was Rod Serling, who's the creator of the Twilight Zone. I didn't know he created the seminal UFO doc until like maybe a year or two into like being super into UFOs. So there are things like that in my life that like, you know, my godfather is this like trippy guy who like he kind of channels Rudolf Steiner.
Whoa.
And like, you know, like there's stuff like that where I'm like, well, what is that? And then the problem I always have with talking about things like that is it feels so self-indulgent, and you have all these people who like go on Gaia and they're like messianic, and they're like, it's like the Dan Sherman thing, or it's like you show up at the UFO conference and you have the fucking, you know, stigmata or whatever. And like, I definitely don't think of myself as that at all. But yeah, I've had trippy things around, you know, truth seeking, probably sacred truths that like, you know, involved like probably past hierarchies or whatever. And then weird synchronicities
what do you
around
mean by past hierarchies.
Like how the world works in sort of maybe a hierarchical ordered sense. Like maybe that, you know, is this vestigial thing that like no longer works anymore and like needs to, I don't know, but like that would be my,
I'm just so, I know
I have this gestalt sense that that's the case, that the hierarchies of the past, in the way we've organized the means of production, which I sound like a fucking Marxist now or something, but like the way our system has worked is, and it doesn't work, is not going to work anymore. And is the common, like the common thing people talk about with respect to this is AI, but I think there's something much bigger going on. And I think our conception of our place in the world is just going to drastically change in our lifetime. And who knows, you know, it's like, was Jacques Vallée saying this like, you know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, like when you lever your life into a thing, I'm sure there's a lot of confirmation bias. And so like, maybe I just end up like, you know, coming out with some of these things, but I don't know. I think things will come out in our lifetime that, you know, you're going to put out that, you know, UAP Gerb and Chris and like all these like independent people who are like good natured and like into this stuff, that I think are going to like really shift the way we see ourselves, you know. And I think it'd be cool. I don't know, who knows, but you
know, speaking of being self-indulgent, Patrick Harper, I don't even know if I want to say this on the air. Because this is super self-indulgent sounding too. I don't remember if he said this to me during the interview or after, but he's like, obviously I have immense respect for Patrick Harper. And I think he's somebody who really is plugged into his daimon and is, you know, he wrote this insane book called Mercurius, which is the alchemical magnum opus through 3 different layers and veils, that eventually led to him feeling like he was directly connected to Mercurius personally.
Wow.
And he opens it with like this epigraph from Mercurius, basically saying like, if you're not reading this for the right reason, doom will basically be visited upon you. Like if you're not after the philosophical gold, if you're after the physical gold,
Yes.
this is a path of doom for you.
Yeah.
And how crazy is that to think about when we're talking about people like Parsons and people who met these just incredibly poetic demises, right? But yeah, he said to me, "You're in the golden chain now, Michael." And I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm of that purity, but I would be lying. I'd be playing small if I said I don't hope that I am.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of that is,
well, if you put yourself on the path, then if you're not now, you will have to be, because it'll, you're going to get like the impurities will be excavated,
Yeah.
So
yeah. And either that, or maybe I'll be walking into my own doom. But I think,
yeah, but doom is temporary, like if you believe in the metaphysics that you're studying all the time, then it's sort of like, you have a lot of tries at this thing. And
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Well, in some ways I hope so, and in some ways I don't, right? Because some of them are like, hey, guess what? Not only do you get a lot of tries, you're a human forever, bitch.
Yeah.
Like, that's what Iamblichus said. So that for people that don't know Iamblichus, the Neoplatonic sage, his view is like, yeah, a human soul is basically like a minor god, but a human soul is a human soul. There's no reincarnating upward. There's no regressing back into being an animal. A human soul it's like a math equation, right? It's it's got some kind of ontological status that doesn't move. It is what it is. It was made that way at the moment of creation. It stays that way.
Yeah.
So what you can do is you can be more conscious of your incarnations, like a Platonic bodhisattva, basically.
Sure, yeah.
And you can shepherd others and try to like move them toward wisdom, but you can't go any higher. That's it.
Yeah.
And you can become more aware of cosmic law and draw divinity into yourself and blah, blah, blah. But that's it. So there's like that version. And then there's also we're on this crazy ascent journey. Like a human gets to become a guiding daimon, and then it gets to become an angelic being or some higher, being.
Yeah.
And so, who knows? But anyway, I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope that I was contributing to something or tipping the scale in some direction.
You definitely
in whatever small way.
No, you clearly are. I mean, I think you clearly feel that I'm sure you have. Well, it's so interesting because you talk about Hermeticism, so you must feel. I think this is probably true of all these people, like John Mack and Terence McKenna and all these people. They probably feel like they're hermetically linked to a part of. I think Stanislav Grof, Albert Hoffman, and I think Carl Ruck like viewed themselves as like the new Eleusis or whatever. Like they was just trying to reinstate the mystery rituals, and I think probably something that most UFO researchers wouldn't want to admit, but like it's definitely true, is that they're all motivated by a lot of these weird autobiographical things, and it's just you cannot turn yourself into this perfect impartial censor that's just just looking at the data. Like you have to be motivated to look at stuff for a reason. And usually all of these things are pre-leveraged by your psychology and by your, biography and autobiography. But that's not to say that there isn't some big purpose also for, I think it's both.
Yeah. Obviously, for me, I gravitate toward the idea that we have like a daimon, a guide, that we do have some kind of at least soft fate.
I gravitate towards that too.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think if some people, if you were to really like drill down and be like, you kind of like, you don't know what's in your future, and there are definitely some surprises that like, come from your subconscious or seem like they come from out of left field, but you kind of know the like westerly direction to which you're headed, and there are these like illusory kind of things you see along the way that become the North Star, and they're like false North Stars.
That's true. Yeah.
But then in retrospect, when they get kind of, destroyed, you're like, that wasn't really meant for me,
Right.
And, again, all of this stuff you could chalk up to like, hindsight bias or whatever.
Right.
But I think there's this latent pre-knowledge that, a lot of people, all knowledge is recollection. I think a lot of people are tapped into that, with their own life.
I do too. There's got to be like some crazy 50-letter German word that means looking back on your path and with 2020 hindsight, being like, holy shit, it cannot be a coincidence that I went this route. Yet in every moment, you have no idea what you're doing. Like that weird, that would like the sort of weird, again, paradox of that sort of way of being is what it's always felt like to me.
When I interviewed Rogan here, and like he was like, why am I me, and why have I had these experiences? Do we have free will, or is it predestined? And he goes, it's both. And I feel like I should have, like, if I have a regret from that interview, I should have drilled down on like he's led such a crazy life. Like, if anybody's like tipping the scales of timelines, it's like him, you know, whether that's like an incidental byproduct of just his passion for, like, you know, chit-chatting with his comedian buddies or whatever, and like, you know, casting it out, and then all of a sudden it's the biggest media channel in the world, or something more intentional. But I think that like everybody has those thoughts, and then somebody like him is obviously checking against the grandiosity, because I think he is a really cool, like, normal dude. Like,
he seems like it, honestly.
I think he is. And but I think everybody has those thoughts. Everybody has the like, why me for this thing? And like, I mean, I in many ways, like with the UFO stuff, I feel very like the timing feels very, like, I feel very lucky that, like, because it's given me an outlet to like explore stuff that I'm just really passionate about. And to be honest, I'm skeptical of a lot of the like disclosure agents. Like, I do think there's like a lot of fucking weird astroturfing and counter intel. And you know, I think there are, like, now in retrospect, some flaws in that like 2017 New York Times article. I'm sure. But am I grateful that ultimately that like the world cares way more about this stuff than they did, like, you know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago? And I am. Yeah. And I think it's just so interesting, and it leads you, if you're well-intentioned, to really cool places.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, meeting cool people, going to cool events, entertaining. I was going to say important ideas, but at least ideas that are fun. They're not all important ideas. Some of them are a little like pornographic in a sort of like fantasy kink sense or something like
that.
But,
it's on Twitter. It's like, well, Eric Davis said this, and this person said this, and then you take Lukatsky, and it's like, it is like Sports Center, but for UFOs. And it's like this weird, like this is disclosure. No, this is disclosure. You know, like, and everybody's arguing these like semantic detail, and everybody wants to be like the disclosure person, and it's just this weird food fight. And following of like kind of like human drama around something that we can't help ourselves. Like, it's like this superhuman thing. But ideally, you're into this stuff because you want the more like primordial metaphysical stuff. And, you know, I think I'm at my best when I'm headed towards that. And then obviously I fall into the, you know, bullshit all the time.
Because all the time. It's fun, right? And it is probably a part of the truth, or again, it's germane to the higher truth. Like, it has some piece of the higher truth, or maybe in some cases it's just distracting us, or it's a dead end. But you got to, it's like when you're playing an RPG, right? Like, you want to see what's down that way. I got to check what's down that way. Yeah. And then maybe it's a dead end and there's no treasure chest. And you're like, God, why do the game designers put that in there? But I needed to go check.
No, totally. And like, look, I do think it's worth calling out like a lot of the, you know, bad acting in UFO stuff. But like, what is frustrating is when the bad acting isn't covering up some sacred truth. Right. Because if it was, I'd be like extremely interested in it. I'd be like, oh, every time I mention XYZ program or thing, I get a slap on the wrist, or like, you know, somebody comes after me or whatever. Like, oh, that's the thing. That's true. You get to the point in this subject where you have a lot of stuff that's kind of weird happen to you, and you just learn to put your blinders on. Because what you could have some freak out about it, and you could start covering that. And then you lose to whoever did that. You lose to them. So you'd be like, oh, this drama happened, and the blah, 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 and you get all sappy, and or you just keep going. Yeah. And, you know, maybe it's a little crazy to keep going, but like, I don't know. I always say this. I always say, I care about my life, and I'm a patriot. And if I'm going to disclose anything that like puts the US at a serious disadvantage vis-a-vis our adversaries, or if I'm going to put my life at risk, just tell me,
Right,
you know?
right.
Like I have enough like sources who are like adjacent to probably spooky people on the inside or whatever, who like just get it to me in some way that like, don't cover this or whatever.
But then would that really stop you if it was just a don't cover this? Because
well, you'd have to look into, you'd have to know like why, you know, but like, but I do, I do care about my life.
Yeah.
So
likewise.
like, I think
I
you
care
have
about
to,
your life and my life.
Thank you, man. Yeah, no, and same, but I think you have to evaluate the shots across the bow, so to speak, as they come. But yeah, no, in the moment, it probably did determine. In the moment, you get to, you're like, oh fuck, like what the fuck, like really, that's gnarly, that sucks, you know. But then, I don't know, like what am I doing that's so bad? I'm doing it's all open source stuff. Like I said, I'm a patriot, and I you know, I care about my life, and I care about my. People have told me stuff that's, you know, pretty intense. That like, unlike some other UFO reporters or whatever, like they don't say I have a source that says this one thing. You come out with this bombastic claim. Like I do sit on things that I'm not at liberty to tell because the person says this could put my life in danger, or like, you know, I'm trusting you with this and this is off record or whatever. You have to do that.
Yeah.
And it's crazy and if it were like a smoking gun of like a, you know, like, there's a UFO like in a specific place, that'd be one thing, but I don't have any information like that.
Yeah, that's part of, you know, it's like,
and there are people, you are reporters who are sitting on, say they're sitting on things like that. I'm like, I don't know.
And like it or not, it's, you are at least in some sense, a journalist, a reporter, by having human sources, by covering stories, by putting out media. And that's just like, that's actually what I went to school for, is journalism back in the day, even though I never did anything, you know, actually journalistic.
Well,
other
that's
than
a journal,
this, I guess. It's called platonic journalism,
Yeah.
esoteric platonic.
It is.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, is you have to respect that relationship. When the source says this is off record, it has to be off.
Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah.
You're not a good person if you're. I don't believe in that. I don't really believe in that, and I don't believe in the gotcha, like, you know, recording when the person isn't, like, fuck that, man. Like all you are is your word, you know, and so that's like really important to me.
Before we get too far away from it, though,
sure.
Because we were talking about you know, the synchronicity machine, and getting just strangely relevant messages, through it.
Okay, I'll give you a weird. I'll give you a weird.
Yeah,
one.
give me one.
Okay. Oh man, I don't know if.
Come on, Jesse. Come on.
I just know it's going to be used as fodder for like these like Twitter troll people. So I feel like I can't.
I'll be the like an impartial arbiter. And if I really think, don't put that out, I won't put it out. I don't know why I get to be the decision maker.
It's okay. I'll just say it's similar. Sorry, I have to speak high level about it, but it's Mike Masters talks about these like weird things where he get, you know, from his like future human hypothesis or whatever, where it's like he gets signs to keep going. And occasionally I get things like that where it's like, because I think about fucking quitting all the time.
Yeah, dude, I get that.
This space is so annoying, and like, you know, and not necessarily quitting, but like broadening the show out.
Right.
Be like, and I think I do want to do that, to be honest, like not just UFO stuff. But it does feel like I get like nudges from the universe occasionally where it's like, keep going, you know?
I mean, if you don't, I think everybody feels that way.
I think so too.
I've had that happen to me so many times where I feel like no one gives a shit about what I'm doing. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And particularly back in the day before I was full time with it.
Yeah.
Where I did this for like 7 or 8 years before I was like, took the plunge and was like, I'm going to try to do this full time.
Yeah.
And there were so many times along the way where I'm just like, what in the fuck am I doing?
Like,
why am I doing this? And then just inevitably, when I was sincerely doubting what I was doing, I'd get some amazing comment, or like just the right, or a huge guest would reach out without me doing anything, or just some kind of weird thing to nudge me to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I think about it. I'm sure you think about this too, but there are days where people haven't seen certain shows that like haven't seen the light of day where I'm like, that was a wild goose chase. That was insane.
Yeah.
And I don't like making people look bad. So if I cover something and like it's just so on the face of it, just completely ridiculous, and there's no there, I just won't put the thing out. You know, if there's like any possibility that like the thing is legit, let the audience decide. But if it's like clearly bullshit, I'm going to have to either say that and then destroy the person's reputation. And I don't really want to do that. So I just, you know, I'm like, back out, don't touch the fine china sort of thing. And there's days where like I'll cover certain things or follow certain threads and I'm like, Jesus, this is so stupid and ridiculous. And I think, and, you know, if I put the, you know, what, I don't know. Sometimes I'll think I'll get back into my old self where I care more about like I'll be too anchored on like what society thinks about certain professions, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm covering the UFO stuff, and I was making money and I was investing in things that were like these prestigious capacity, and I just think to myself, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
And I get kind of sad, and then something cool happens,
right?
And it's like, oh, amazing, you know. This is why, you know, I'm doing this, because like there is a lot of meat on this bone, so to speak, and yeah, every time I'm like, I think that's like enough UFO stories for a lifetime, and like nothing more is going to come. Something kind of comes into my, you know, kind of sphere or purview, and I'm like, oh shit, there's this crazy thing. And I'm lucky where I'm, you know, young enough where I can just kind of travel, you know, on a dime. And, you know, if the thing is, my threshold for that is definitely getting lower or getting higher rather.
Right.
I'm trying to travel less.
Right. Well, you have this amazing UFO to just beam people up.
Exactly. Yeah. Shout out to Aiden, amazing set designer. But so I'm trying to do more of that, bring more people here. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely like I'm high conviction in like a month to 2 months of stories out from where I am now. And then beyond that, I'm like, what else? Like, how do you up the ante past, you know, like what more can come out, and then something crazy happens. So
always
so I'm just grateful to be on the, you know, having faith in that path.
Well, speaking of being grateful, I'm grateful for you abducting me and allowing me to meld minds with you in the UFO.
Oh yeah,
super
dude.
fun, man. So much fun. The implant was well worth it.
Oh man, well I'm grateful. You know, our methods have become more precise, and no, I'm really grateful that you came here and did this, and I love your show. It's amazing.
I really appreciate that.
And
likewise.
It's so good and so thoughtful on these. Like, I don't think our generation studies. I mean, I study the Spark Notes version of these things, like with the, you know.
I mean, I do too a lot of the time. I'm not like knee deep in primary.
Well,
sources.
no, but I think you have the most important thing, which is like a genuine intellectual. You're like trying to like line it up with like reality, and like the fact that you're connecting Plutarch's story to like Monroe is like, that's the coolest thing to me. You are like finding like, you know, these disparate threads and trying to correlate them and create like a real model of reality, instead of like this like rote, undigested stone of knowledge sort of thing that like academia does. Like, I think that's like what you're doing is like truly what like Plato would like you to do.
I'm trying, brother.
Yeah.
Trying, brother. Well, look forward to future collabs.
Yeah, man.
Let's wrap this one.
Okay. Love it. Sounds good.